The east wall of the stakehold came apart in a single blow, and the sound it made was not a crash but a sigh, the long exhausted sigh of 10,000 tons of poured stone giving up all at once. Line Warden Asu Ren felt the floor of the watchspur lurch under him before his eyes could make sense of what they were seeing. A section of rampart that had taken the labor drones 9 days to raise leaned outward into the dark, hung there against the floodlights as if considering the matter, and then folded down into the mud of the staging yard. 2 artillery sleds went with it. He heard the crews screaming inside the wreck for exactly as long as it took the next impact to land, and then he heard nothing from them at all. The thing that had done it stepped through the gap it had made. Asu had read the survey briefs. He had sat in the War Master's tent while the field naturalists projected their scans and their skeletal reconstructions and their careful estimates, and he had understood, in the way a soldier understands numbers, that the apex fauna of this world ran large. He had not understood it in the way he understood it now, watching one of them fill the breach in his wall like water filling a wound. It came in low and wide on 4 legs thicker than support pylons, its shoulders plated in slabs of natural armor the color of wet slate, its head a broad flat wedge of bone slung forward on a neck that could have swallowed a strider whole. Moss and mud caked its flanks. Old scars seamed its hide in silver rivers. Its eyes, set deep and forward under a heavy shelf of brow, caught the floodlights and threw them back as 2 coins of cold amber, and those eyes were not the dull eyes of an animal in a rage. They were searching. "Contact," Asu said into the command channel, and was distantly proud that his voice did not break. "Contact, east breach, it's through, it's inside the perimeter. All line elements, it's inside." The beast lifted its head, and it sang. That was the only word Asu ever found for it, then or after. The sound came up out of the creature's chest below the floor of hearing, a pressure more than a noise, and it rolled across the stakehold and struck him in the sternum and the teeth and the wet parts behind his eyes. Every carapaced soldier in the yard staggered. The floodlight filaments hummed in their housings. Somewhere a rack of munitions rattled against its restraints like something trying to get out. It was not a roar. A roar was a threat, and Asu's people had 100 words for threats and knew how to answer every one of them. This was a call. It was the sound of a mother standing in a broken house and asking of the whole world where her children had been taken. And the whole world, being made of stone and metal and frightened soldiers, did not answer. The Vantok, that was the word the human had used for them, back when anyone had still been listening to the human, took another stride into the yard. Under its feet, a supply crawler burst like a seed pod. Asu keyed the channel again. Warmaster, respond, east wall is gone. I say again, the east wall is gone. We have an apex inside the perimeter and the ready batteries are underneath it. Requesting orders. The channel crackled. When Warmaster Saj answered, his voice had the flat, over-controlled evenness of a commander who has just watched a plan he was proud of turn to ruin and has not yet decided whom to blame. "Hold the yard," Saj said. "Bring the maulers up. We put it down where it stands, Line Warden. We do not give ground to livestock." Asu looked at the thing in the breach. It had found the wreck of the fallen rampart and was pulling the slabs apart with its forelimbs, methodically, the way a person turns over stones looking for something small. Its claws, each one longer than Asu's arm, dug and lifted and cast aside. It was not attacking the stakehold. Asu understood that with a cold, sinking clarity that he would never quite be able to explain to anyone who had not been standing where he stood. It was not attacking anything. It was digging. It was going through their fortress the way a grieving person goes through the pockets of the dead, and everything that broke, broke because it happened to be in the way. "Livestock," Asu repeated, mostly to himself. Down in the yard, 40 of his soldiers were forming a line. They were good. That was the thing Asu would remember. The Vorn did not break. The Vorn did not run. The line held or the line died in place, and either way the line did not bend. It was the first article of everything they were, drilled into the carapace before a nymph could walk, and these 40 were as good as any the fleet had put down on this green and dripping world. They dressed their ranks under the floodlights with the wall still falling around them. They planted their heavy lances. They brought the barrels up level, and they waited for the range, because that was the discipline, and the discipline had never once in the history of their people failed to be enough. Asu wanted to scream at them to get out from under it. He did not, because he was an officer, and because the order had been given, and because some part of him that he was not proud of still believed the discipline would be enough. The Vantok found nothing in the rubble. It lowered its head, and the great amber eyes swept the yard, and they stopped on the line of 40 soldiers, and for the length of one breath the beast and the line regarded one another across the ruin. Then the human walked out into the space between them. Her name was Ren Osai, and 11 days earlier she had been the least important living thing inside the stakehold, a fact of which she had been reminded so often that she had stopped taking it personally. She was 28 standard years old, of average height for a human and well below average for anything else on this world, with brown skin and close-cropped dark hair, and a plain, tired, unremarkable face that the Vorn found difficult to read and therefore assumed had nothing written on it. She wore field coveralls the mud brown of everything the expedition owned, worn soft at the knees and elbows, with the sleeves pushed up over forearms that were stronger than they looked. She carried no weapon. She had never carried a weapon in her life, and had told the Vorn so on the day they hired her, and they had written it down as one more proof that the contract species were not serious people. The expedition had brought her along the way. A careful surgeon brings a tool he expects never to use. Somewhere in the deep files of the Vorn Reduction Corps, there was a note, Asu had seen it, that read, Contract Fauna Consultant, Human Competency, Unverified Cost, Negligible. Human beings had a reputation, out along the frontier, in the strange, soft economy of species that traded rumors about one another. The reputation was this. Put a human near an animal that wanted to kill everything, and more often than the odds allowed, the animal would decide not to kill the human. Nobody could say why. The humans themselves, when asked, tended to shrug and say something unhelpful about paying attention. The Vorn did not trust anything they could not put in a manual, and there was no manual for what Ren did, and so they had hired her for a negligible cost, and then ignored her with the total, untroubled thoroughness of a martial culture that had never lost a war it could see the enemy in. For 11 days, Ren had walked the perimeter of the Anvil. That was the expedition's name for the stakehold, the Anvil, driven down into the flank of a valley. The Vorn intended to strip to the bedrock for the metals underneath. She had watched the labor drones peel the forest back in sheets. She had watched the survey teams map the game trails and mark the nesting grounds for demolition. She had filed reports, in the small, careful handwriting of a person who knows no one is reading, about the fauna the reduction would displace, and about one thing in particular, and about that one thing she had filed the same report every day for 6 days, each time a little more plainly than the last. There is a resident apex on this range, she had written. It is Denning. Do not clear Grid 9. They had cleared Grid 9 on the 7th day. Ren had been there when they did it, standing at the tape line with her hands jammed in her pockets, because she had learned that if she was going to be ignored, she would at least be ignored in person, where she could see it. The demolition team had brought down the hollow at the base of the ridge with 3 shaped charges, and when the dust cleared, they had gone in to check the ground for anything worth cataloging. And what they had found, in a warm nest of shredded bark and shed hide 3 body lengths deep in the earth, were 4 Vantok cubs. The Vorn had been delighted. That was the part Ren kept coming back to in the 11 days after, turning it over the way you worry a cut with your tongue. They had not been cruel about it, exactly. Cruelty implied they had thought of the cubs as things that could be wronged. To the Vorn, the cubs were specimens, and live apex specimens of a previously uncatalogued megafauna were worth a great deal to the Reduction Corps Xenology branch. Worth more alive than dead. Worth. And Asu had heard the War Master say this himself, pleased at the officer's table. Worth more than the whole grid's ore if they could be shipped home breathing. 3 of the cubs had died within the day. They were too young, and the Vorn handlers did not know the first thing about warming or feeding them, and did not think to ask the human who had spent 6 days telling them the den was there. The 4th cub they gave to Ren. They gave it to her the way you give a difficult chore to the person whose complaints you are tired of hearing. If the human cared so much about the local vermin, the handling master had said, the human could keep this one alive until the transport came, and if it died, that would be the human's failure and not the Corps, and either way the human would stop filing reports about Grid 9. It had been meant as a punishment, or a joke, or both. Ren had taken the cub without a word and carried it back to the specimen pens against her chest, and she had kept it alive for 11 days, and in doing so she had done the one thing that was going to matter, though not one soul inside the anvil yet knew it. She called the cub Ash, for the gray of its soft young plates, the pale ash gray that the adult slate armor grew out of and darkened over. Ash was the size of a large hound and built like a boulder learning to walk, and for the first 2 days it had refused everything Ren offered and lain in the corner of the pen, making a thin, dry, clicking sound that she felt in her back teeth before she heard it with her ears. On the 3rd day she had stopped trying to feed it and had simply sat with it, her back against the pen wall, doing nothing, saying nothing, letting the small, dreadful clicking wash over her. And somewhere in the long middle of that night, the cub had crossed the floor and put its blunt, heavy head against her leg and gone to sleep, and Ren had not moved for 6 hours because she did not want to be the one who broke it. After that, Ash ate. After that, Ash followed her along the pen rail when she walked, and leaned its growing weight against the mesh to be near her, and made, instead of the dry clicking, a low, pleased rumble that lived in the same register as its mother's song, an octave up and a world softer. The Vorn handlers thought this was very funny. They came to look at the human and her monster through the mesh, and they made the flat clattering sound that was Vorn laughter, and one of them, a big handler named Drev, took to reaching over the rail to flick the cub hard on the snout, because it startled Ash into that thin, dry click, and Drev found the click amusing. Ren asked him twice to stop. The second time she said it very quietly and looked at him for a while afterward, and Drev, who outmassed her 4-to-1 and wore chitin she could not have dented with a hammer, found for reasons he could not have named that he did not come back to the pens after that. She kept the cub alive. She kept it warm with the field heater from her own bunk, and fed it on protein slurry cut with the fats she rendered off her own rations, and she learned the map of it, where it liked to be touched, and where it did not, the way its plates flushed darker when it was frightened, the specific pitch of the click that meant hunger and the different pitch that meant something else, something she did not have a word for and did not like, a sound Ash made in the small hours facing the wall that pointed east, toward the ruined ridge, toward the place it had been dug out of the ground. On the 11th night, Ash made that sound for 6 straight hours and would not be comforted. And a little before dawn, from somewhere out beyond the floodlights, out in the black dripping forest the Vorn had not yet gotten around to killing, something answered it. Ren was awake. She had been sitting with the cub, her hand flat on the warm gray plates of its back, and she felt the answer before she heard it, felt the pen mesh thrum, felt the slurry shiver in its bowl, felt it come up through the floor and into the bones of her hand where it rested on the frightened cub. Ash went rigid under her palm. Then it threw its head back and it called, full-throated, a small raw version of a sound Ren had heard exactly once before. On a survey scan she had flagged and no one had read. And out in the dark the answer came again, closer and closer than that. And Ren stood up in the pen with her heart going like a fist on a door and said, to no one, to the empty handling shed, to the sleeping fortress full of soldiers who had cleared Grid 9. "Oh no, oh you fools, she's been looking for 11 days. Then the east wall came apart in a single blow, and the long night of the anvil began. By the time Asu got down from the watch spur to the edge of the staging yard, the maulers were coming up. The maulers were the heaviest thing the expedition had, four-legged siege-walkers 3 times the height of a soldier, slab-armored, each one carrying a crew of 6 and a bow-mounted rail lance that could punch a hole through a bunker. On any world the Vorn had ever fought on, a mauler was the end of the argument. There were 4 of them at the anvil, and Warmaster Saj committed 3 of them to the yard that night, holding 1 in reserve at the command redoubt, in a decision that Asu would later understand had been about the Warmaster's own skin, and not about tactics at all. The first mauler came through the inner gate at a heavy trot, its walker legs throwing up sheets of mud, its lance already tracking. Asu pressed against the base of the intact south wall with the survivors of the watch spur crew, watched the gunner get his lock. It was a good lock. The range was point blank. There was no possible way to miss. The gunner did not miss. The rail lance fired with a crack that flattened the puddles for 10 meters and drove a bolt of ferrous metal the length of Asu's body into the Vantok's shoulder at a speed that should have blown the joint apart. The Vantok turned its head and looked at the mauler. The bolt had gone in perhaps a hand's depth and stopped, caught in the layered slate of the shoulder plating and the wall of muscle beneath. A wound, certainly, a real wound, dark fluid welling up around the shaft, and utterly, obscenely insufficient. The beast did not stagger. It did not scream. It turned its head and it looked at the machine that had hurt it with those deep, cold, searching eyes, and Asu watched something change in the way it held its body, watched the digging animal that had been going through the rubble in search of its young become, in the space of a breath, something else entirely. It stopped looking for its children. It started looking at the thing that had shot it. "Back," Asu breathed, though no one could hear him and the mauler crew could not have obeyed if they had. "Back, back, get it back." The Vantok crossed the yard. Asu had seen strike cavalry charge. He had seen a breaching ram hit a gate. He had never seen anything the size of a building move the way the beast moved then, low and impossibly fast, its clawed forelimbs eating the ground, and the mauler crew got off one more shot that went wide over its lowered back, and then the beast was inside the reach of the lance, and it rose up on its hind legs against the walker like a wave standing up out of the sea, and it came down on the machine with both forelimbs and all of its weight. The mauler did not fall over. That was the wrong way to describe it. The mauler stopped being a shape. One instant it was a siege walker, and the next it was a spreading low tangle of metal in the mud with the beast standing in the middle of it, and the sound of the crew inside was mercifully brief. The second mauler fired, the third fired. Both bolts struck home, one in the flank and one high on the back, and the beast wore them the way a soldier wears burrs, and it came off the ruin of the first machine and went for the second, and the yard that Warmaster Saj had ordered held became, in under 2 minutes, a place where the line learned a new thing about the world. The second mauler died against the north wall. The third lasted longer, because its pilot was clever and kept the machine moving, backing and circling and putting wreckage between itself and the beast, and for a few minutes it seemed almost as though the discipline might yet find its footing. Asu allowed himself the thought. He was still allowing himself the thought when the Vantok stopped chasing the third mauler, wheeled, and brought down the last standing section of the east wall onto the machine from the side, burying it under 100 tons of its own fortress. Then the beast stood in the center of the ruined yard, 3 siege-walkers dead around it, and lifted its head and sang again, and this time the note in it had changed. The searching was still there underneath, but over the top of it now rode something Asu's people did understand, something every soldier of every species understood in the deep places below language, and it turned the survivors in the yard to stone where they stood. It was fury. The 40 soldiers of the line had not fired. Asu realized it with a lurch. They had dressed their ranks and planted their lances, and then the maulers had come up behind them, and the whole engagement had happened over their heads, and they had stood there in perfect order through all of it, because no one had told them to do otherwise. 40 of the best troops in the fleet standing at attention in the killing ground while the machines died. Now their sergeants were looking back over their shoulders toward the command redoubt, waiting for the order, any order, and the order did not come. And Asu understood that up in the redoubt War Master Saj was looking at the same thing they were, and had not yet found, in all his years and all his victories, a word for what to say. Asu keyed the channel. War Master, pull the yard element back to the south wall, please. They're standing in the open and it's done with the machines. They will hold, Saj said. War Master, they will hold, Line Warden, and you will hold, and we will bleed this animal until it falls, because that is what we are. The War Master's voice had gone tight and high in a way Asu had never heard from him, the voice of a man gripping the edge of something. It is one beast. One. We have put down armies. I will not signal the fleet that a Vorn stakehold was carried by a single piece of native livestock. Send the cadre. The cadre. Asu had forgotten, in the roar and ruin of the machines, that the anvil still had its hunters. The hunt cadre was 12 soldiers, hand-picked out of the whole expedition, the ones the Corps used for exactly this, the pursuit and killing of dangerous fauna, on foot, with the heavy shoulder lances and the paralytic barbs and the cold, patient tradecraft of predators who had made a discipline out of ending other predators. They had taken down apexes on 9 worlds. They wore no heavy armor because heavy armor made a soldier slow, and against animals slowness was death. They went in light and fast and low, in pairs, and they did not miss. War Master Saj had shown them off to the officers' table on the second night out from the fleet, and Asu had watched them drill against holograms of the local fauna, and thought, privately, that they were the finest hunters he had ever seen. He watched all 12 of them go out into the yard now, spreading wide around the beast in their pairs, and for a few minutes he let himself believe again. They were good. They were so good. They did not bunch and they did not rush. They worked the flanks, drawing the beast's attention one way with a barb to the shoulder, while a second pair put a lance into the hip from the blind side, peeling it apart the way they had peeled apart 9 worlds of lesser things, and the beast bled from a dozen new wounds and turned, trying to face all of them at once. For a few minutes it was a hunt, a real hunt, the oldest contest there was, and the cadre knew every step of it. But they had learned the contest against animals that ran. Against animals whose whole design, when the pain and the fear grew great enough, was to break and flee, so that the hunter's art was really the art of turning flight into a killing funnel. And the mother of the Vantok did not run. She had one thing left in the world worth having, and it was not out here in the yard. It was somewhere inside these walls, and no quantity of pain the cadre could put into her was going to make her leave without it. So when the hunters peeled her apart, she did not funnel. She chose. She fixed on the nearest pair, and she went through them, absorbing their barbs, wearing their lances, and she was on them before their tradecraft could turn her. And the 2 hunters who had killed apexes on 9 worlds discovered, in the last second of the 10th, that all their discipline had been built on a lie about how the biggest things behave when you finally corner them. After that it was not a hunt. After that it was the cadre trying to disengage from something that would not let them, and failing, 1 pair at a time, in the mud under the floodlights, while Asu watched and could do nothing. 4 of the 12 made it back to the south wall. The War Master's finest, the pride of the officers' table, the killers of 9 worlds. The beast broke them in under 6 minutes, and did not slow, and turned back toward the fortress, still looking for the one thing that would make it stop. War Master, Asu said into the channel, and his voice was not steady anymore. The cadre is gone, 8 of them. It went through the cadre like they were recruits. I am asking you again, pull the yard element back and let me try to reach the consultant because she is the only. Bring up the fence, said War Master Saj. The fence. Asu closed his eyes for a moment behind his visor. The fence was the sonic barrier, the perimeter deterrent, the reduction core strung around every stakehold to keep the local fauna off the wire, a lattice of emitters that put out a directed subsonic wall, a pressure screen pitched to drive animals mad with the need to be somewhere, anywhere else. It worked. Asu had seen it turn a stampede of range grazers at full gallop, seen them break and flee from a barrier they could not see. Against small brains and soft ears, it was the kindest weapon the Corps owned, because it hurt nothing and killed nothing, and simply made the far side of the line unbearable. He looked at the beast standing in the ruin of the maulers, the beast that spoke to its lost young in a voice pitched below hearing, the beast whose entire world was built out of the deep sounds under sound. And he understood, in the way the human had probably understood 11 days ago, exactly what was about to happen. War Master, do not bring up the fence, Asu said. I'm asking you. That animal lives in the low register. It's whole, the way it hears, the way it calls, it's all down there, it's all in the same band as the barrier. You won't drive it off. You'll. Bring up the fence, said War Master Saj, or I will find a line warden who will. They brought up the fence. Ren was already out of the pens when it happened, moving along the inside of the south wall in the dark with ash pressed to her chest under her jacket, and she felt the barrier come on the way you feel a storm change the pressure in a room. Every hair on her arm stood up. The cub against her chest went stiff and silent. And out in the yard the beast, she could see it now, past the corner of the wall, a slate mountain in the floodlights standing over the wreck of the machines. The beast threw its head back and made a sound that was not a song at all. It was the thin, dry click. It was Ash's small, frightened click, the one the cub made facing the wall in the dark, magnified into something that shook the puddles, and Ren understood with a sick twist that the fence had not driven the mother away. The fence had reached down into the one register where the animal was defenseless, the register it used to find its children and grieve for them and call across the black forest, and it had filled that register with a scream. They had not deterred her. They had cornered her, in the only place she truly lived, and there is nothing in the wide catalogue of the universe more dangerous than a mother who has been cornered while looking for her young. The beast turned toward the nearest emitter mast and destroyed it. Then it destroyed the next, and the next, moving along the perimeter with a terrible new economy, and each mast it tore down was mounted on a section of the inner works, and the inner works came down with them. And the fence, the barrier meant to hold the fauna out, became a map that led the beast straight along the spine of the stakehold, tearing the anvil open emitter by emitter, following the pain to its source. Along the south wall, 20 meters from where Ren stood frozen with the cub, a squad of soldiers broke. She would remember it because it was the first time she saw a Vorn break, and she had been told, over and over, in the flat proud way they told her everything, that it did not happen. 4 of them simply turned and ran, dropping their lances, scrambling over the low south wall and out into the dark toward the transport pad, and their sergeant screamed after them, and then, after a moment, went over the wall too. The discipline was a thing built for enemies you could shoot. It had no article for the thing in the yard. It had no article for the way the ground itself seemed to be screaming. Ren pressed herself into the angle of the wall with the cub and made herself small and thought, very clearly, the way she thought when everything was coming apart. All right, all right. What does she need? Not what do I need, not what do they need. What does she need, and can I be the thing that gives it to her? The answer was in her arms, clicking in terror against her ribs. She just had to live long enough to reach the beast without being killed by her own side, or the animal's grief on the way. Up in the command redoubt, War Master Saj watched the fence come down section by section on the tactical display, and did not, for a long moment, say anything at all. Asu had come up from the yard on the War Master's own order, Saj had called his surviving officers in, all of them, to the high stone room at the heart of the anvil, and Asu understood the shape of it as soon as he came through the blast door. The War Master was gathering his people around him because the plan had failed, and the walls had failed, and he needed now to be seen deciding something. Needed the officers to carry back down to the ranks the sight of the War Master in command. Saj stood at the display table with his 4 subcommanders and the Xenology Chief and the Handling Master, and the light of the display threw hard blue shadows up the ridges of his carapace, and he looked, Asu thought, like a carving of a War Master rather than a War Master, a monument to the idea of unshaken command erected in the exact moment the thing it commemorated was crumbling. "Casualties," Saj said. 3 maulers, said the first subcommander. "Full crews, the east and northeast walls. Perhaps 60 in the wall collapses. The yard element is a pause. The yard element is withdrawing without orders, War Master. They are deserting. They are withdrawing, War Master. The barrier appears to have." "The barrier," said the Xenology Chief, "was a mistake." Everyone in the room looked at her. She was old for a Vorn, her carapace gone the dull matte gray of great age, and she had spent 40 years cataloging the fauna of worlds the core intended to erase, and she had the particular fearlessness of someone who has already been passed over for every promotion that mattered. She met the War Master's stare without flinching. "The consultant warned us," she said. "The human," she filed it. "The apex on this range is an acoustic hunter, low register, extremely social." She used that word, social, and I did not credit it, and I should have. "The barrier operates in the same band the animal uses to communicate. We did not deter it, War Master. We reached into the one thing it cannot defend, and we hurt it there. And now it will not stop until the hurting stops, and the hurting is us." "The human," Saj said. "Yes, War Master. The contract fauna consultant. Cost, negligible." The War Master's mandibles worked slowly. "You are telling me before my officers that a fault in the reduction of this stakehold was correctly predicted by the human we hired for the price of its rations, and ignored by the core." The Xenology Chief was silent. It was answer enough. Asu watched the War Master then with a soldier's careful attention, and he saw the moment the fear in the room found a place to land. It could not land on the beast. The beast could not be shamed, could not be court-martialed, could not be made to answer for the failure of the line. It could not land on the War Master himself. Saj would sooner have opened his own carapace on the table. And so it landed where fear always lands in a proud army that has just been beaten in front of itself. It landed on the one who had been right. "Where is the human now?" Saj said. "In the pens, presumably," said the Handling Master. "We gave it the last cub to nurse." He stopped. Asu watched the Handling Master arrive, a beat too late, at the same understanding the Xenology Chief had reached, at the same understanding that had bleached Asu's own gut hollow 20 minutes ago in the yard, at the understanding that the human had reached 11 days before any of them. "As a chore," the Handling Master finished, faintly. "The cub," said the Xenology Chief, very quietly. "War Master, the animal in the yard is denning aged and lactating. It has been circling this position for 11 days. It came through the wall and it dug through the rubble of the East Works. The demolition team reported the den was in that grid before we cleared it. It is not attacking the stakehold, War Master. It never was." She looked at the display, at the slate shape tearing the 6th emitter mast off the 9th section of wall. "It is looking for its young, and we have exactly one of them left alive, in a pen, with the only creature in this fortress that animal might not kill on sight." The high room was very quiet. "Then we have the animal's price," Saj said at last, and something in his voice made Asu's carapace crawl. "Bring me the cub." The Handling Master went down to the pens with 6 soldiers and found them empty. Ash's pen stood open, the mesh gate unlatched, the field heater still warm, the bowl of slurry half finished on the floor. Of the human and the cub there was no sign. The handling master stood in the empty pen for a moment with the 6 soldiers crowding the door behind him, and then he reported up the channel, in the careful voice of a subordinate delivering news his commander will not want, that the consultant had taken the specimen and gone. Gone where? Saj said. Nobody could tell him. The anvil was coming apart. A third of the perimeter was rubble. The tracking net was blind in half the sectors where the emitter masts had fed it power. A human on foot, small and quiet, and carrying an animal she had spent 11 days learning to keep quiet, could have been anywhere in the dark warren of the stakehold's inner works, and the men Saj could have spared to find her were busy, at that moment, dying. Because while the handling master searched the empty pen, the beast reached the last of the emitter masts and tore it down, and the fence went silent. And into the sudden ringing quiet the beast stopped screaming and went back to searching, and its search led it, at last, along the broken spine of the fortress to the specimen pens. Asu was in the redoubt when the feed from the pen sector went black. He saw the last image the camera sent, the slate wedge of the beast's head coming through the wall of the handling shed, unhurried now, almost gentle, and below it the small pale shapes of running soldiers. Then the feed ended. The handling master's channel ended with it. Asu never learned the details and did not want them. He only knew that the 6 soldiers who had gone to bring the War Master, the cub, met the mother of the cub instead, in the place where her last living child had been kept in a cage, and that the beast came away from that place with the smell of her young in its nose and no young to show for it, and that whatever small measure of restraint had been holding the searching apart from the fury did not survive the pens. After the pens, the Vantog stopped digging. After the pens, it began to hunt. "We can still use this," War Master Saj said. He said it to the tactical display, to the red icons winking out one by one across the map of his fortress, but he said it for the room, and the room, the 4 subcommanders, the xenology chief, Asu standing near the door with the cold going deeper into him by the minute. The room listened because it had no choice. "The consultant has the cub," Saj said. "The animal wants the cub. Therefore the cub is the highest value asset in this stakehold, and I will not have it wandering loose in the hands of a contractor with no rank and no doctrine and no understanding of what she is holding. Find the human. Recover the specimen. We stake the cub in the open on the transport pad, under the guns of the reserve mauler and the massed lances of 2 full lines, and we draw the animal onto killing ground of our choosing, and we put it down over the body of its own young. That is the plan. That is a plan. Assets, objective, ground of our choosing. Execute it." For a moment no one moved. Asu found to his own surprise that he had begun to speak. "War Master, if we stake the cub, the animal comes to the cub. It will come through anything. We have already seen it come through anything. We will be putting 2 full lines and our last mauler in the one place on this world we know for certain the beast is going to charge. And we will be doing it to kill a nursing animal over the corpse of its child, in front of the ranks. And the ranks have already watched 3 maulers die, and a barrier fail and their own comrades break. And I do not think, War Master, I do not think the sight of that is going to steady them." Saj turned his head slowly and looked at Asu, and the look was not anger. It was worse than anger. It was the flat, unseeing look of a commander who has stopped hearing anything that is not the shape of his own plan. "You have opinions about the rank's morale, Line Warden. I have opinions about staking a cub as bait, War Master. I have opinions about doing to that animal, deliberately, on the transport pad, the exact thing that has already cost us 3 maulers and 2 walls. We heard it in the one place it could not defend, and it tore the fence out of the ground to reach us. If we take the last thing it is looking for and dangle it over open ground and shoot at it while it tries to reach it, then it will die reaching," Saj said, "and the line will see that even this could be brought down, and that is the only thing that will save us tonight, not the cub, Line Warden, not the walls, but the rank seeing that the thing that has been killing them can be killed. Find the human. That is not a discussion." Asu saluted, because there was nothing else to do, and went to find the human, and while he searched for her the beast found the reserve mauler. The reserve mauler had been held back at the command redoubt, and the crew had spent the whole long night listening to the other three die over the channel, and they were, when the beast came for them, past the point where discipline meant anything. They fired early. They fired at a shape in the dark at the mouth of the redoubt approach, a shape that turned out to be the beast because of course it was the beast, and the bolt took it in the chest and staggered it, the first blow of the night that had staggered it, and for one bright second the crew believed. Then the beast came up the approach. Asu was 50 meters away, flat against a supply bunker, and he saw all of it. He saw the mauler get off a second shot and a third, saw both strike, saw the beast wear them and keep coming with dark fluid sheeting down its chest, and its breath sawing in and out in great ragged bellows that he could feel in the ground. It was hurt. For the first time all night it was genuinely, deeply hurt, and Asu understood that the War Master had been right about one small thing, that the animal could be killed, that enough iron delivered to the right place would eventually end it, and he understood in the same breath that it did not matter, because the animal did not care whether it could be killed. It had stopped caring the moment it found the empty cage. It came up the approach on 3 good legs and one dragging one, into the teeth of the last mauler, and it took the machine apart the way it had taken apart the first, except slower, except with a deliberateness that was almost worse. And when it was done, it stood over the wreck swaying, bleeding, ruined, and it lifted its head toward the high stone room where the War Master stood, and it sang. The song had changed again. There was no searching left in it. There was barely any fury. What was in it now was something Asu had heard only once before in his life, standing over the body of a soldier he had trained from a nymph, a sound with no violence in it at all, and it was so much worse than the fury that 3 of the 4 sub-commanders in the redoubt above him, veterans of a dozen reductions, made a low involuntary keening in their throats and could not stop. It was grief. The animal believed its child was dead. It had torn open a fortress and killed the crews of 4 siegewalkers, and it had found, at the end of all of it, an empty cage, and it had come to the only conclusion an animal could come to. And now it stood in the ruin it had made and mourned, and it was going to keep mourning in that unbearable register, and killing everything it could reach, until someone killed it, or until the sun came up on a stakehold with nothing living left inside the walls. That was the moment War Master Saj ordered the army to run. He did not call it running. He called it a general disengagement, a phased withdrawal to the transport pad and the ships, a preservation of force. But Asu heard it go out over the all-channel in the War Master's tight high voice, and he heard the thing underneath the words, and so did every soldier still alive in the anvil. All line elements, break contact and withdraw to the pad by sections. Do not engage. I say again, do not engage the animal, break and withdraw. This position is lost. The War Master, who had refused to give ground to livestock, who had fed 3 maulers and 2 lines, and his own reserve into the dark rather than signal the fleet that a stakehold could be carried by one beast, had looked at the grieving animal swaying over the wreck of his last machine, and had understood that there was no version of this night in which he won, and had chosen, in the end, to save what he could of himself. It was not, Asu thought, even a cowardly choice. By every doctrine the Corps had ever written it was the correct choice, the only sane choice: cut the loss and run. Asu keyed his acknowledgement and turned to organize the withdrawal of the men nearest him, and he was reaching for the shoulder of the closest soldier when he saw, across the ruined yard, in the wash of the one floodlight still burning, a small mud-brown human figure walk out of the shadow of the south wall into the open ground, alone, unarmed, carrying something gray and living cradled against her chest, and turned to face the beast. No, Asu said. The human did not hear him. She was 200 meters away, and she was looking at the animal, and she was walking toward it, and the whole broken fortress seemed to hold its breath. The War Master's voice came back over the channel, and for the first time all night there was something in it that was not command. "What is that? Line Warden, what is that on the yard? Is that get it back? Get the human back, that is a core asset, that is the get it off the ground, that animal will." "War Master," Asu said, and was distantly amazed to hear how calm his own voice had become. "War Master, be quiet." He said it to a superior officer over an open channel, an offense that in the ordinary run of things would have ended his career and possibly his life, and he did not care at all, because he had understood something, watching the small figure walk out onto the killing ground with the cub in her arms. He had understood what the human was doing. She was doing the only thing left in the whole catalog of the universe that might work, the one thing no article of Vorn doctrine contained. The thing the Xenology chief had named 11 days too late, and the War Master would have died before he tried. She was going to give the animal its child back. And every gun in the stakehold was pointed at the ground. She was walking across. "All line elements," Asu said into the channel in the calm, terrible voice of a man who has decided, "hold your fire. Nobody shoots. Nobody shoots at the yard, nobody shoots at the animal, nobody shoots at the human on my authority. Hold, hold, hold." "On whose authority?" the War Master snarled. "On mine," said Line Warden Asu Ren, and shut off the channel, and stepped out from behind the bunker into the open where the soldiers could see him, so that if the human was going to walk unarmed toward the grieving apex, she would not do it while an army decided on its own whether to fire into her back. Ren walked. She had done the arithmetic in the shadow of the south wall, the only arithmetic that mattered, and it had come out the way she had known it would. There was no clever version of this. There was no plan that got the cub back to its mother without Ren standing, at some point, close enough to the beast to be killed by it. She could not throw the cub across the yard. She could not lure the mother to a safe distance and leave the cub and back away, because there was no safe distance from an animal that had come through a fortress wall, and because Ash, terrified, would follow her and not stay. The cub had to be carried. It had to be carried by someone the mother did not immediately kill, across open ground, into reach, and set down, gently, in the one narrow moment when the animal's grief cracked open far enough to let recognition in. Ren was the only creature alive who might survive being that someone. She knew it the way she knew her own hands, so she stopped doing arithmetic and she walked. The yard was a moonscape. Slabs of fallen wall lay canted in the mud, the wrecks of the maulers smoked, the one surviving floodlight threw everything into hard silver and hard black. 200 meters ahead of her the beast stood over the ruin of the last machine, swaying, its head hung low, its breath coming in those great tearing bellows she could feel in the soles of her feet. It had not seen her yet. Its grief had turned it inward. She was grateful for that because it gave her the first 50 meters for free, 50 meters to get her breathing right and her heart slowed and her hands steady, 50 meters to become, as much as she was able, the calm, still thing she needed to be. She walked, and because the body cannot hold a thing that large without letting some of it in, she let herself think, once, about the day they had cleared Grid 9. She had stood at the tape line with her hands in her pockets and watched the shaped charges bring down the hollow at the base of the ridge, and she had known, before the dust cleared, what the demolition team would find in there, because she had spent 6 days telling them. She had watched them carry the cubs out of the ground into the hard light, 4 small gray shapes, blinking, clicking, too young to be afraid of the right things. And she had watched the Vorn handlers pass them hand to hand, pleased, cataloging. And she had done the arithmetic even then, standing at the tape, cold in her stomach. Somewhere out on that range was the thing these had come out of, and it was going to come looking. She had written it in her report that night, the last report anyone did not read. The resident apex will return to this site. It will not understand that its young were taken. It will understand only that they are gone. She had underlined gone. 11 days later she had been proven right in the worst way it was possible to be right. and being right had never once, in her whole strange life, made her feel anything but tired. 3 of them had died. She made herself think that too, walking, because the mother was going to smell it on the one that lived, was going to know, and Ren wanted to have already faced the thing she was carrying toward. 3 of the 4 gone in a day, in the handling shed, from cold and from wrong food, and from the total incuriosity of people who had decided the small clicking things were specimens and not children. She had not been allowed near them. By the time they gave her the 4th as a punishment, the other 3 were already past saving. She had kept the 1. She had done everything right and kept the 1, and it was not enough. It was never going to be enough. And she was about to walk it up to a grieving mountain and ask it to be enough anyway. Ash felt her calm and did not believe it. The cub was rigid against her chest, its blunt head tucked under her jaw, its plates gone dark with fear, making the thin, dry click over and over in a rhythm like a failing pulse. She put her mouth close to the small, round ear and breathed rather than spoke. "I know," she said. "I know. Almost, little one, you're going home." At 60 meters, the beast's head came up. Ren stopped. She stopped the way you stop when you have startled something in the dark, which is to say completely, every part of her, the breath in her chest and the blood in her ears, going still all at once. She did not look at the beast's eyes. She had learned that on 100 jobs across a dozen worlds, you do not stare down a frightened apex. Staring is what a rival does. Staring is a challenge, and she had not come to challenge anything. She looked at a point on the ground a little to the side of the beast's forelimbs, and she let it look at her, let it take her in. One small brown two-legged shape standing alone in the middle of the ground where it had killed everything else that moved. The great head lowered, the amber eyes fixed on her. Ren felt the attention land on her like a weight, like a hand pressing flat against her whole body, and every animal instinct she owned screamed at her to run. And she did not run, because she had spent her whole strange life learning that the animals who lived were the ones who did not run, and she trusted that lesson more than she trusted her own fear. The beast drew a breath, and the breath was different, deeper, drawn in through the nose, a scenting breath, and Ren understood that it had caught the smell of her. Or not of her. Of what she carried. "There," she breathed. "There it is. Smell him. Go on. Smell him." Behind her, distantly, she was aware of the fortress, of the soldiers frozen along the broken walls, of the guns she knew were trained on this patch of mud, of the fact that at any second one frightened trigger could end all of it. She pushed the awareness away. It was not part of the problem she could solve. The only problem she could solve was 6 meters wide and 8 tons heavy, and standing 60 meters away deciding whether she was a threat, and she gave it all of herself. The cub in her arms went silent. Then Ash lifted its head off her jaw, turned toward the swaying slate mountain across the yard, and called. It was a small sound, a child's sound, that same raw miniature of the mother's song that Ren had heard in the pen the night the answer first came out of the forest. It went across the ruined yard in the ringing quiet after all the guns, and it reached the grieving animal, and Ren watched the effect of it travel through 8 tons of muscle and bone like a current through water. The beast went rigid. Its head snapped level. Its ears, small for its size, set back and low, came forward, cupping. And it made in answer not the grief song and not the fury song, but a short, broken, interrogative note. A sound with a lifetime of hope crammed into half a second. The sound of a creature that has already buried its children in its own mind and cannot let itself believe. Ash called again, louder, straining against Ren's arms toward the sound of its mother. And the beast started forward. "Marksman," Warmaster Saj said, "West Spur, you have the animal take the shot." Asu heard it because Saj had reopened the command channel and was speaking on it deliberately, over Asu's head, past Asu's held fire order, straight to the sharpshooter emplaced on the one intact tower of the west wall. It was a good position. It had a clean line on the beast as it came off the Mauler wreck, a clean line that would only get cleaner as the animal moved into the open toward the human, and a heavy anti-materiel lance in trained hands could put a bolt through the base of that broad skull and perhaps, end the whole thing. It would also put the beast down 40 meters from a human carrying its cub, dropping 8 tons of dying animal in a thrashing arc across the exact ground Ren Osai was standing on, and it would do it while the animal was, for the first time all night, not attacking anything. West Spur confirmed, Saj said, take the shot. Asu was already running. He ran along the inside of the south wall toward the tower stair, and as he ran he shouted into the channel uselessly, knowing it was useless. West Spur, hold. This is Line Warden Ren, hold your fire. And he heard the marksman's voice come back, young, strained, caught between 2 officers and the oldest instinct any soldier has, which is to obey. Line Warden, the War Master is ordering the shot. I know what the War Master is ordering. Look at the ground behind the animal, look at it, tell me what you see. A pause. Asu took the tower stair 3 at a time, his lungs burning, his old wound singing in his side. There's the consultant is on the ground behind it, the marksman said. Sir, the human is directly behind the animal. If I drop it there it'll. Say it, Asu gasped, coming up onto the tower platform, and there was the marksman, a young soldier not 2 years out of the Nymph Corps, down on one knee behind the big lance with the beast's skull sitting fat and certain in the sight, and the human a small brown smudge in the blur beyond it. Say what happens if you take the War Master's shot. It falls on her, the marksman whispered. Yes. West Spur, Saj's voice again, harder now, with the edge of a man who can feel a thing slipping. You have a lawful order. Take the shot or I will have you broken to labor for the rest of your service. Take the shot. The marksman looked up at Asu. He was very young. His hands on the lance were steady, because they had drilled the steadiness into him before they had drilled anything else, and his eyes above the steady hands were the eyes of someone being torn cleanly in half. Asu did the only thing he could think of. He did not order the young soldier to disobey the War Master. He knew, with the weary certainty of an officer who has spent his life inside the line, that if he made it a contest of orders the boy would break toward the War Master, because that was the shape the boy had been poured into. So he did not make it a contest of orders. He crouched down beside the marksman, and he put one hand on the young soldier's shoulder, and he said, quietly, under the channel just to him, if you take that shot, you will kill the human who is trying to save all of us, and you will do it on the War Master's word, and the War Master will not carry it. You will carry it, you, for the rest of your life. Now I am not going to touch your lance. I am not going to give you an order. I am going to stand here beside you, and you are going to decide, right now, what kind of soldier you are going to have been. The beast crossed the yard toward the cub. The marksman took his hands off the lance. He did it slowly, deliberately, lifting them clear and folding them in his lap, and then he bowed his head. And over the channel the War Master was still speaking, and the young soldier simply stopped hearing him. And Asu straightened up on the tower with his hand still on the boy's shoulder and looked out across the ruined yard at the small brown figure and the slate mountain closing on her and thought, whatever happens now, we did not shoot her in the back. Whatever else we did tonight, we did not do that. Below them, the human set the cub down on the ground and stepped in front of it and waited for the mother to arrive. Ren had felt the moment the shot did not come. She could not have explained how. There had been a pressure at the base of her skull, a certainty of the gun on the tower, a cold spot between her shoulder blades where the bolt would go. She had felt it since the beast first moved, and she had made herself keep breathing through it, made herself keep her hands gentle on the cub, because the mother would read the fear in her body, and the mother had killed a great many frightened things tonight already. And then somewhere in the last 10 seconds, the cold spot had gone warm. The gun had let her go. She did not know why, and she did not have time to be grateful. She filed it away, one problem solved by someone she could not see, and gave the whole of herself back to the animal. Because the animal was very close now. It came the last 30 meters at a walk, on 3 sound legs and one that dragged, its head swinging low, and with every stride the size of it resolved into something the human mind refused to hold. From the shadow of the wall it had been a mountain. Up close it stopped being anything the eye could take in whole. It was a wall of scarred slate hide that went up past the reach of the floodlight. It was a forelimb setting down in the mud beside her with a weight she felt in her knees. It was breath like a furnace and a smell like wet iron and deep earth. And it was 30 centimeters above her upturned face, one amber eye the size of her own head, ringed in ancient scar, fixed on her with an attention that had killed the crews of 4 machines. Wren set the cub down between her feet. She did it slowly, folding down to a crouch, never breaking the line of her body, and she felt the beast's whole weight of attention follow the small gray shape down to the ground, and she straightened again, slowly, and stepped forward over the cub, so that she stood between the mother and the child, one unarmed human woman planted in the mud with 8 tons of grief and fury looming over her. And she did the thing that no doctrine in the Vorn Reduction Corps contained. The thing that the whole night had been building toward. The thing she had walked 200 meters across a killing ground to do. She looked up into that vast amber eye, and she opened her empty hands to show that they held nothing, and she said, in the low, even voice she used in the pens in the dark, the voice that had crossed the floor to a frightened cub and stayed. I kept him warm. Do you understand me? I don't know if you do, but I kept him warm and I fed him and I sat with him in the dark and I brought him back to you. He's all I could save. I'm sorry about the others. I'm so sorry about the others. Her voice did not shake though her eyes had filled. But this one I kept and here he is and I'm going to step aside now and you're going to have your son back. All right, easy now. I've got no hands on him. Look at me. I've got nothing but him. And she stepped aside. For a long moment, nothing happened at all. The beast did not take the cub. It stood over the small gray shape with its head lowered, and Wren, 3 steps to the side now with her empty hands still open, understood that the danger was not past, that in some ways the most dangerous moment of the whole night was this one, right here in the quiet. Because the mother could smell her child, yes, but she could also smell what was all over her child, 11 days of the enemy, the pens, the Vorn, the handling shed where her other young had died. The cub reeked of the fortress that had taken it, and the animal standing over it was working through a grief and a rage that had killed everything it touched. And there was a real and terrible chance that the smell of the captors would win over the shape of the child, that the mother would look at this thing that carried the scent of her enemies and not be able to see her son underneath it. Wren had thought about this in the shadow of the wall. She had not had an answer for it then, and she did not have one now. All she could do was be still and be empty-handed and trust the cub. The cub saved them. Ash, released, took 2 wobbling steps out from between Wren's feet toward the vast dark shape it had been calling to all night, and it lifted its blunt head, and it did not make the frightened click and it did not make the small song. It made a sound Wren had never heard it make, a sound she realized she had been waiting 11 days to hear without knowing it. A deep contented burr from somewhere in its chest that was the exact sound the adults made, an octave down, a lifetime of safety in it. The sound a Vantok cub makes, she would understand later, only for its mother, only when it is home. It pressed its face against the great scarred foreleg and it burred, and it butted its head into the mud-caked hide, and it burrowed in against the warmth of the huge body with the total, boneless trust of a child that has stopped being afraid. And the mountain came apart. That was how Wren saw it afterward in memory, the towering, rigid, grief-locked animal simply coming apart at the joints, its head dropping, its shoulders sagging, the terrible tension that had driven it through walls and machines going out of it all at once. The great head came down and around, and the beast pressed its blunt jaw against the cub and breathed it in long shuddering pulls, scenting it over and over from crown to tail as if it could not make itself believe, and the low interrogative note came again, and each time it was answered by the cub's contented burr, And something changed in the beast's breathing, the ragged furnace bellows easing into something deeper and slower. And Wren stood 3 steps away with tears running openly down her face now, and did not bother to wipe them, because no one was watching who mattered, and because the thing in front of her was the most important thing she had ever done, and she wanted to feel all of it. The mother curled her body around her son in the mud of the ruined yard, and for one moment, one single moment out of the whole long murderous night, the war stopped. Then War Master Saj gave the order to fire. Asu heard it from the west tower, and he had known it was coming. He had known it the way you know a wound is going to hurt before the pain arrives. He had watched the reunion through the marksman's abandoned sight, the human stepping aside, the cub stumbling home, the great beast folding down around its child, and he had felt on the tower in his own chest, the thing every decent soldier in the anvil was feeling in that moment. A loosening, an unclenching, the animal grief that had held them all in its fist finally letting go. He had thought for the space of a breath that it was over, that it could simply be over, that the animal would take its child and go, and they would rebuild the walls or abandon the site, and it would be over. He had forgotten for that one breath about the War Master's face. "All batteries," Saj said, and his voice on the channel was calm now, calm the way the eye of a storm is calm, calm with the awful stillness of a commander who has found at the bottom of the ruin of his night the one thing that will let him bear it. "The animal is stationary, the animal is wounded, the animal is occupied. This is the ground of our choosing, and the moment is now. All batteries on my mark concentrate fire on the apex. Massed volley. We end this here over its young, and the fleet will hear that the anvil held. Ready." "Belay that," Asu said. "And fire." Nothing happened. Asu stood on the west tower with his hand still on the marksman's shoulder and his heart in his throat, and he listened to the silence after the War Master's mark, and it was the most beautiful silence he had ever heard. The batteries did not fire. The lances did not fire. Along the broken walls of the anvil, 400 surviving soldiers of the Vorn Reduction Corps sat inside their fear, and their grief, and their exhaustion with their fingers on their triggers, and the War Master's lawful order ringing in their ears. And they looked out at the small brown human standing beside the great animal curled around its rescued child. And one by one, in the dark, without a word passing between them, they decided not to. It was not a mutiny. Asu would insist on that later, to the review board, to the fleet, to anyone who tried to make it into one. A mutiny was soldiers turning against their command. This was something the Vorn did not have a word for yet, because it had never happened before in the history of the line. 400 soldiers who did not turn against anything, who simply, quietly, all at once, could not find it in themselves to fire into the one moment of mercy they had witnessed all night. They held their fire the way a held breath is held. And in the high stone room at the heart of the fortress, War Master Saj gave the order to fire a second time, and a third, his voice climbing, and 400 guns stayed silent, and the War Master of the Anvil discovered that he commanded an army that would no longer kill for him. "Who is jamming the channel?" Saj said. "Line Warden Wren. Wren, report." "Why are the batteries not Wren? You will answer me. Why is my army not firing?" "Because they can see, War Master," Asu said very quietly into the channel to all of them, to every soldier on the wall and the man in the high room both. "For the first time all night they can see. That is all. Nobody is jamming anything. Your army is looking at what the human did, and it will not unsee it, and it will not fire on it. I could not make them fire if I wanted to. Neither can you. It's over, War Master. Let it be over." Wren did not know in the moment how close she had come. She learned it later. Asu told her days after. In the quiet, careful way he told her everything, about the massed volley that was ordered 3 times and never came. In the moment she knew only that she was standing 3 steps from a wounded apex predator curled around its child, and that the animal's breathing had changed, and that she needed, very badly, to be somewhere else before the mother remembered that the whole rest of the world still smelled like the fortress that had caged her son. She began to back away. She did it the way she had done everything that night, slowly, with her hands open and low, one careful step at a time, her eyes on the ground beside the beast and not on the beast itself. She got one step. She got two. On the third step, the mud sucked at her boot and she made a small wet sound, freeing it. Nothing. A nothing sound, and the great head came up off the cub and swung toward her, and Wren froze with one foot still lifted, and her heart stopped in her chest. The amber eye found her, fixed on her. And Wren understood in that frozen half-second that the animal was seeing her now not as the shape that had carried its child, but as a shape that was moving, that was leaving, that had had its son in its arms and might, the logic of the grief still running underneath everything, might be trying to take him again. She saw the plates along the beast's spine lift. She saw the great muscles gather. She had misjudged it. She had done the whole impossible thing, and now she was going to die in the last 5 meters of it, killed by a mother's terror of losing the child a second time. And there was no time to run and nowhere to run to, and she was so tired, suddenly, so terribly tired, that a part of her almost welcomed the stopping. Then the cub bird, ash, half buried against its mother's foreleg, safe, warm, home, lifted its head at the smell of Wren backing away and made the small, contented sound, the pen sound, the sound it had made every night for 11 nights with its head against her leg. And then it did something that undid Wren completely, something she carried in her chest for the rest of her life. It took its face out of the warmth of its mother's side, and it looked at the retreating human, and it made the click. Not the frightened click, the other one, the one it made when she left the pen at night and it wanted her to stay. A small dry sound directed at her, unmistakable, "Come back, don't go." The mother's head swung from the human to the cub and back. Wren watched 8 tons of predator work through it, watched the great animal look at its child making the stay sound at the retreating shape, watched it understand. She would never be able to prove it understood, and she never once doubted that it did. Watch it fit together the smell of the fortress and the shape that had carried its son, and the sound its son was making now. The comeback sound, the sound a cub makes for something it does not want to lose. And the plates along the beast's spine came down. The gathered muscle eased. The great head lowered slowly, until the amber eye was level with Wren's face, an arm's length away, close enough that she could see her own small reflection curved in the dark of it, close enough that the furnace breath moved her hair, and the animal looked at her for a long, long moment with an attention that was no longer weighing whether to kill her. It was learning her. It was writing her down, the way she had spent 11 days writing down the cub, the shape of her, the smell of her, the sound of her voice. It was deciding what she was. "Hey," Wren whispered, and her voice cracked on it and she let it. "Hey, it's all right, I'm not taking him. I'd never take him. I was giving you room." She lowered herself, very slowly, back down into a crouch, so that she was not standing over anything, so that she was small and low and open-handed in the mud in front of the vast lowered head. "I'll stay," she said. "If that's what he wants, I'll stay a minute, okay? I'll stay." The beast breathed her in one more time. And then, with a gentleness that stopped Asu's heart on the tower and every heart along the walls, the great scarred mother of the Vantok reached out with her blunt jaw and touched the human once, very lightly, on the shoulder. The way she had touched the cub, the scenting touch, the "this is mine" touch, and drew back, and settled down into the mud around her child, and let the small brown 2-legged thing crouch there beside them in the ruin, inside the circle of her body. Inside the place where nothing in the world was permitted to come. Along the walls of the anvil, 400 soldiers watched an apex predator take a human into its family, and not one of them made a sound. The animal was dying. Wren saw it once she was close enough to see anything, once the terror had drained down out of her and left her able to look. She crouched inside the circle of the great body with the cub bird warm against her hip, and the mother's flank rising and falling beside her like a slow tide, and she made herself do the thing she was for, the thing she had always been for on every strange job across every strange world. She paid attention. And what she saw, once she paid attention, sank her heart. The mother had taken 7 bolts across the night. Wren counted them in the gray growing light, 3 in the near shoulder, wearing away, ugly but shallow, caught in the slate armor, 2 in the flank, deeper, weeping dark, 1 high on the back, glancing. And one, the last one, the reserve Mauler's shot, the one that had staggered the beast the only time all night it was staggered, one driven deep and low into the chest, below the armor shelf, in the soft place behind the foreleg where the plates gave way to hide, angled up and in toward the great furnace of the lungs. That was the one. The others would scar and heal, and not into the silver rivers already seaming the animal's hide. That one was killing it. Wren could hear it now that she was close and still, could hear it under the deep tide of the breathing, a wet catch at the top of each breath, a faint bubbling drag, the sound of a lung filling with what should not be in it. The mother had come through a fortress and killed the crews of 4 machines and torn a barrier out of the ground and reunited with her son. And now she was going to lie down in the mud with him and drown, slowly, over hours from the inside. No, Wren said out loud to no one. No, not after all that, no. She looked at the bolt. It stood out of the beast's chest at a low angle, a shaft of ferrous metal as long as her forearm, barbed near the head the way the core barbed everything, driven in past the barb so that the flesh had closed over them. Pulling it would tear. Pulling it might kill the animal faster than leaving it, might open the vessel it had missed, might do nothing at all against a wound that deep. She was a fauna consultant, not a surgeon, and even a surgeon would have balked at what she was looking at. Every rational part of her said leave it, said back away, said you have done the impossible thing already. Do not die reaching into the chest of a wounded apex for a bolt you cannot pull. She reached for the bolt anyway. She did it slowly, narrating it under her breath the way she had narrated every dangerous thing all night, her hand going out low and open toward the great chest. I see it, she murmured. I see it, I know it hurts, I know, I'm going to touch it. I'm just going to touch it first. That's all, just touch. Her fingers found the shaft where it left the hide. The beast's flank went rigid, the huge head came up, the amber eye rolled toward her and there was pain in it and warning in it, a low sound starting deep in the chest, and Wren did not pull, did not flinch, kept her hand still and light on the shaft and her voice low and even. I know, bad, it's bad, isn't it? You've been carrying it all night. Let me take it out. I took him out of the ground and I brought him back to you, didn't I? And now I want to take this out of you and it's going to hurt worse before it hurts less, and I need you to let me. Easy, easy now. Look at your boy, look at him. He's home. You did it. Now let me do mine. The warning sound went on for a moment, then it stopped. The great head lowered back to the mud. The eyes stayed on her, wide and dark and full of pain, but the body, impossibly, against every instinct and animal that deep in agony should have owned, the body went still. It gave her the wound. It lay in the ruin of the yard with its child against its side, and its enemies on every wall, and it gave the small brown 2-legged thing the killing wound in its chest, because the small thing had brought back its son, and because some deep apex arithmetic that ran below anything Wren would ever understand had weighed her and found her, against all the evidence of the night, to be pack. Wren set her feet, she got both hands on the shaft, and she looked up, past the beast's shoulder, at the gray shapes of soldiers on the broken wall, and she raised her voice for the first time in hours and called out across the yard, clear and flat and carrying. I need a med kit, a real one, a big one, the field surgical and clamps, and whatever you've got that stops bleeding in something this size. And I need someone to bring it to that line in the mud and no further and set it down and back away. Right now. She's got a lung filling. I can pull the bolt, but I can't hold what comes after it alone. She paused, and then, because she had spent 11 days being ignored and she was done with it forever, she added, one of you owes her a debt tonight. All of you do, pay it. Asu brought the medkit himself. He would not order anyone else to do it, not because he doubted them, but because he had spent the night giving orders that had gotten soldiers killed. And this was the first order all night he could carry on his own back, and he wanted it. He came down from the west tower, and he crossed the ruined yard alone, the field surgical kit heavy in both arms, past the wrecks of the maulers and the slabs of fallen wall, out into the open ground where no Vorn had willingly walked in 6 hours, toward the great dark shape of the beast and the small brown shape crouched inside the circle of it. And every step of the way he was aware of the amber eye tracking him, and of the animal's low breath, and of how very easy it would be for the mountain to rise up and end him. It did not rise. It watched him come. When he reached the invisible line in the mud where the human had told him to stop, he stopped, and he set the kit down, and he looked, he could not help it, past the human's shoulder at the animal's face, at the eye the size of his own head, and the animal looked back at him. And Asu, who had commanded soldiers for 30 years and had never once in his life been afraid of anything he could name, felt himself measured by something older than his whole civilization and let go. "Thank you," Ren said without looking up. Her hands were on the bolt. "Line Warden Ren," Asu said. "Asu, I gave the order that brought up the fence. I want you to know I argued against it. That's not the same as stopping it, but I argued." "I know," Ren said. "The old one told me you'd try, the scientist." She adjusted her grip. "You held the guns just now. That's what I'll remember. Now back up 3 steps and stay there because I'm about to hurt her worse than she's ever been hurt, and I don't know what she'll do, and I'd rather it wasn't you she does it to." Asu backed up 3 steps and stayed there. "All right," Ren said to the beast, low again, gentle again. "All right, here it is. Here's the bad part. You hold on to your boy, you hold on to him, and you let me." She pulled. It came out in a long, sick drag, barbs and all, and the beast screamed. Not the song, not the fury. A raw physical scream of an animal in the worst pain of its life. And its whole body convulsed, the great head whipping up, and Asu's hand went to his sidearm on pure instinct, and he did not draw it, made himself not draw it. Watched the human ride the convulsion, crouched against the heaving flank with her arms already buried to the elbow in the wound, and watched her not stop. Dark fluid welled up over her hands, over her arms, sheeting down into the mud. She had the field clamp between her teeth. She was talking the whole time, a steady, unbroken, low stream of it. "Easy, easy, I've got it, I've got you, hold on to him. Hold on," and the cub against the beast's side was making the frightened click and the burr both, tangled together, and the beast's scream broke down into a long, shuddering groan, and its head came down, and it held onto its boy, and it let the human's hand stay inside the wound. Asu had witnessed a great many things in 30 years of service. He had never witnessed anything like the sight of that small, mud and blood-covered human, elbow-deep in the chest of an apex predator that could have killed her with a shrug, packing a lung wound closed with her bare hands and a field clamp, and the flat, steady sound of her own voice, in the gray light of a dawn coming up over the ruin of a fortress that same animal had destroyed. He would try to describe it later to the review board, and he would fail, and he would stop trying. And for the rest of his life, when someone asked him what humans were, he would think of that and say only, "They pay attention. They pay attention to the things the rest of us have decided not to see, and then they act on it, and it is the most dangerous and the most decent thing in the galaxy, and I have seen it, and I do not have better words." The bleeding slowed. The wet catch at the top of the breathing eased. It did not stop. It would not stop for days, and the animal was not out of danger and would not be for a long time, but the drowning drag went out of it, breath by breath, and the great tide of the beast's flank settled into something deeper and steadier. And Ren, when she finally drew her arms out of the wound and sat back on her heels in the bloody mud, was shaking so hard she could barely hold the clamp. "There," she said, her voice had gone thin. "There, that's the worst of it. That's the worst of it now, I promise, the rest is just time." She pressed her forehead for a moment against the beast's warm, scarred shoulder, heedless of the blood, of the danger, of the 400 soldiers watching. "You stubborn, magnificent thing," she said, so quietly only the animal could hear. "You came through a wall for him. Of course you did. Of course you did." And that was when the first of the others came out of the trees. Asu saw the movement at the tree line before he understood it. The forest the Vorn had not yet killed stood a kilometer off past the ruined east wall, a black wall of it going gray now in the dawn, and along the edge of it, in the mist rising off the wet ground, shapes were separating from the dark. Big shapes. Slate-gray shapes, low and wide and mountainous, moving out of the trees onto the cleared ground with the unhurried certainty of things that own the world they walk on. He counted 4, then 7. Then he stopped counting because more kept coming, and because the counting had started to make a cold, hollow space open in his gut. The survey had said it. The word the human had used and no one had credited. Social. The apex of this range was extremely social. Asu heard the Xenology chief's voice in his memory, saying it in the high room, and heard under it the human's careful handwriting on 11 days of ignored reports, and understood at last, and far too late, what it meant. The beast in the yard had not been a lone monster. It had been a mother, yes, but a mother has kin and a social apex has a pack, and the pack had heard. All night across the black dripping range, they had heard one of their own singing the searching song, and then the fury song, and then the grief song, the deep calls carrying kilometers through the ground and the air, and they had come. Not all at once, not in a charge. In the slow gathering way of a people answering a call for help, from the near dens first, and then the far ones, drawn in through the dark over hours, until now, in the gray of the dawn, they stood along the tree line in a long dark rank. 20 of them, 30, mountains of scarred slate muscle with the mist curling off their backs, and they looked across the cleared ground at the ruin of the fortress, and at the small brown human crouched in the middle of it with her arms red to the elbow, and at their wounded kinswoman lying in the mud with the human's hand's work packed into her chest. And they began, all of them together, low and vast and rolling, to sing. The song of 30 apex predators is not a thing a body is built to withstand. Asu had thought the single beast's call was the worst sound he would ever feel. He had been wrong. The pack sang as one, 30 deep chests loosing the subsonic roll across the cleared ground in a single vast chord, and it came up through the soles of Asu's feet, and the plates of his carapace, and the fluid behind his eyes. And along the walls of the anvil, the soldiers who had held their fire through everything went down, not dead, not hurt, simply overwhelmed, dropping to their knees and clutching their heads as the sound reached into the low places of their bodies and shook them. The wrecked munitions rack finally gave and spilled its bolts into the mud. A section of weakened wall sighed down. And in the middle of the yard, the wounded mother lifted her head off the ground and answered her kin with a single cracked note, and the pack heard it, and the song changed, and the whole dark rank of them started forward across the cleared ground toward the fortress at a walk. "Get the War Master on the channel," Asu said to his signals officer, who had come up beside him gray-faced on the tower. "Get me anyone. We have 30 of them and they are coming, and we cannot. There is no version of the next 10 minutes where the line survives 30 of those. Get me the War Master." He did not need to. The blast door of the command redoubt was already opening. War Master Saj came down into the yard on foot, with the 2 sub-commanders who had not broken and a hand-picked file of the redoubt guard, and Asu, watching from the tower, understood that the War Master had made a decision, and that it was the wrong one, and that there was very likely nothing left in the whole ruined night that could stop him from making it. Saj came out into the open ground with his sidearm drawn, a heavy officer's lance pistol, useless against a wall of slate, magnificent and useless, and he strode across the mud toward the small brown human and the wounded beast and the cub, and behind him the pack came on across the cleared ground, and above the whole tableau the dawn came up gray and pitiless on the ruin of everything the War Master had built. "Step away from the animal," Saj said. Ren did not step away from the animal. She was on her knees in the mud beside the beast's wounded chest, her arms red to the elbow, the cub pressed against her hip, and she looked up at the War Master. The first time she had ever looked at him, really, the commander who had cleared Grid 9 and taken the cubs and brought up the fence and ordered the run, and then ordered the volley over the reunion, the whole author of the night. And Asu, watching from the tower, saw the human's plain, tired face and could not read anything on it at all, and understood that this was exactly what the Vorn had always found so difficult about her, and that it had never once been because there was nothing there. War Master, Ren said, "You need to lower that and listen to me, because I am, right now, the only reason you're going to see another sunrise, and the window on that is closing while you point a pistol at me." Saj did not lower the weapon. "There are 30 of them," he said. His voice had gone strange, not the tight high edge of the knight's earlier orders, but something flatter, further away, the voice of a proud man walking the last few meters toward the edge of himself. 30, coming across open ground toward a position I cannot hold. My army is on its knees. My machines are dead. And you are telling me you, the consultant, cost negligible, that you are my salvation. That the human I hired for the price of its food is the thing that stands between the Vorn reduction core and the loss of an entire stakehold. "Yes," Ren said. "I would sooner die," said War Master Saj, "than owe my life to that." And he raised the lance pistol, and he pointed it not at the human but past her, at the great lowered head of the wounded mother lying in the mud, at the one clean shot into the eye that even a pistol could make at that range, at the animal that had beaten him. Because if he could not save the stakehold and he could not command his army and he could not undo the night, he could at least, at the very end, kill the thing that had done this to him, could take that one victory into whatever came next, could make it so that the beast did not outlive the War Master it had broken. 3 things happened at once. The pack, 40 meters out now and closing, saw the drawn weapon and the wounded kinswoman, and surged from a walk into a charge, 30 mountains of slate coming across the last of the cleared ground with a sound like the world ending. Asu, on the tower, opened his mouth to scream an order he already knew no one could carry out in time. And Ren Osai stood up out of the mud and stepped in front of the pistol, and put herself between the War Master and the wounded mother's head, and raised one red open hand not toward the War Master, but toward the charging pack. And she did not shout, because shouting was fear and the animals would read the fear. But she pitched her flat, low voice to carry the way it had carried across the pens, the way it had crossed a floor to a frightened cub, and she said one word. "Stop." The pack stopped. 30 apex predators, mid-charge, 40 meters from the fortress, at the sound of one small human voice. They broke stride and dug in, and stopped, throwing up a wall of mud, so close now that Asu could see the individual scars on their shoulders and the steam of their breath in the cold dawn air, close enough that if they had come 3 more strides nothing on the wall could have lived. They stopped. And into the ringing silence after their stopping, the wounded mother in the mud lifted her head, and looked at her charging kin held frozen by the human's raised hand, and made a sound. It was not the searching song or the fury song or the grief song. It was low and short and complex, and Asu did not have the first idea what it meant and understood every bit of what it meant. The mother looked at her pack, and she looked at the small, red-handed human standing over her in the mud between herself and the pistol, and she told them in the only language she had, the oldest and simplest announcement in the whole long book of living things. "This one is mine. This one is pack. Whatever else stands here, this one you do not touch." The pack answered, a low, rolling murmur passing down the whole dark rank of them, 30 deep chests taking up the mother's note and repeating it, acknowledging it, writing it down. And then, one by one, the great slate heads lowered, and the plates along 30 spines came down, and the pack that had been 3 strides from destroying the fortress settled onto the cleared ground in a long crescent facing it, and waited and watched the human, because the wounded one had claimed her, and among the Vantok. Asu would come to understand The claim of an injured kinswoman was a law that stood above hunger and above fury, and above the memory of the young they had lost. War Master Saj stood in the middle of the yard with a drawn pistol, and no army and 30 apex predators arranged in a patient crescent around him at the pleasure of a human he had called cost negligible, and he understood at last all of it. Asu watched it arrive on him. Watched the War Master understand that the human had not been boasting, that she truly was the only reason he was alive, that his life and the lives of every soldier on the wall now hung on the good will of a creature he had spent 11 days despising, and one night trying to have shot in the back. Watched the pistol in the War Master's hand begin, very slowly, to lower. "You cleared Grid 9, Ren said to him. Her voice was quiet now, pitched for him, though it carried in the silence. "I told you the den was there. I told you 6 days running. You cleared it, and 3 of her children died in the rubble or in your handling shed, because your people didn't know how to keep a cub warm and wouldn't ask the one person who did. And then, when it all came apart, when the walls came down and the maulers died and your barrier drove her mad, you ordered your army to run. Do you know what I've learned, War Master, in a life spent around the things you people call livestock?" She looked down at the wounded mother, at the cub, at the patient crescent of the pack. "They don't run. When one of their own is hurt, when their young are taken, they don't scatter and save themselves. They come, all of them, from every den on the range. They come and they don't stop coming, and they will tear a mountain down to reach one lost child." She looked back up at him. "You ordered your army to run. Hers came running the other way." The War Master did not answer. There was nothing to answer. Every soldier on the wall had heard it. On the open channel Asu had never closed, and every soldier on the wall was looking at the truth of it arranged in slate around the yard, and War Master Saj stood in the middle of it with a lowered pistol, and understood that his command was over, not because anyone had taken it from him, but because there was no longer anything in the whole ruined fortress that would move at his word. He had ordered the batteries to fire, and they had not fired. He had come down to kill the beast himself, and the human had stopped it with one raised hand. He had said he would sooner die than owe his life to the human, and now he owed his life to the human, and the whole line had watched him say it and watched him owe it. And there is no article in any doctrine of any martial people for the thing that happens to a commander after that. He holstered the pistol. It was the only dignity left to him, and he took it, and no one begrudged it. "Line Warden Ren," he said, and his voice had gone quiet and very tired, an old man's voice, all the tightness gone out of it and nothing to replace it. "You have command of the anvil. Do what?" He stopped. He looked at the pack, at the wounded mother, at the human. "Do what she tells you," he said, and turned, and walked back across the yard toward the redoubt alone, and no one saluted him, and no one needed to be told not to. And that was the end of the war of the anvil, though the sun was barely up. Asu came down off the tower. He crossed the yard on foot the way he had crossed it with the med kit, and this time the pack watched him come and did not stir, because the human was watching him come, and the human was unafraid. And Asu understood that he was moving through the world now under a protection he had not earned and did not fully believe, a protection that ran through the small mud-covered woman standing in the middle of it all. He came up to the invisible line, and this time she waved him across it, and he came and stood beside her, over the wounded beast, inside the circle of the pack, and for a while neither of them said anything. "Will she live?" Asu asked finally. "I don't know," Ren said. "The wound's packed. The lung's a question, if I can keep it clean and keep her still for a few days, but I can't keep an 8-ton apex still, Asu, nobody can, so mostly it's up to her." She looked at the cub, dozing now against its mother's warm side, exhausted, safe. "She's got a reason to try, though. That helps. It always helps." Asu looked at the pack, at the 30 patient slate mountains arranged in their crescent, at the dawn coming up gold now over the tree line behind them. "And them," he said. "What do they want?" "They want to see how this ends," Ren said. They came for her, they'll stay for her. They'll stay as long as she's down, and they'll watch everything we do, and if we do one wrong thing to her or to that cub, she did not finish it. She did not need to. But we're not going to do one wrong thing. Are we, Line Warden? No, said Asu, we are not. They named it 3 days later, though the naming was not a thing anyone decided so much as a thing that happened, the way weather happens. It started with the marksman, the young one from the West Tower who could not stop talking about it, about the human walking out onto the killing ground, unarmed, into the reach of the animal that had destroyed 3 maulers, carrying the one thing that might save them all, while an entire army watched with its guns down. He kept trying to describe it and kept reaching for the language of a charge, because a charge was the bravest thing a soldier of the line knew, the running advance into the enemy's teeth, and he kept saying it was like a charge except she had nothing. She went with nothing, no weapon, no armor, no line beside her, nothing in her hands at all but the enemy's child, and one of the older soldiers listening finally said the words that stuck. The empty-handed charge, he said, that's what it was. She made the empty-handed charge. And it stuck, the way the true names always stick, and it went up the channel and down the ranks, and eventually into the after-action record that Asu filed with the fleet, filed deliberately, over the objection of officers who did not want it written down. The empty-handed charge, defined therein, in the flat language of Vorn doctrine, as the deliberate unarmed advance toward an apex threat by an operator who has correctly understood what the threat requires. Undertaken not to destroy the threat but to resolve it, and recognized henceforth as an act of the highest order of courage the Corps could conceive of, ranked in the record above the taking of any wall. But that was later. In the immediate hours after the War Master walked back across the yard alone, there was only the wounded animal, and the human, and the slow gray work of keeping death away from a thing too large to move. Ren did not leave the mother's side for the first day. She worked the wound in shifts of her own devising, cleaning it and repacking it and watching the color of what came out of it, and when she needed something she called for it across the yard in her flat carrying voice, and the line brought it. That was the thing Asu could not get used to in those first hours, the sight of the Vorn bringing things to the human, antiseptic wash from the field hospital, clean cloth, a tarp rigged on poles to keep the rain off the wound, a field heater, when the mother began to shiver in the afternoon, the same model of heater Ren had used to keep the cub warm in the pens, and a soldier carried it out across the yard and set it down at the line in the mud and backed away, and Ren carried it in and set it against the beast's flank, and the great animal, feeling the warmth, made a low sound Asu had not heard from it before, a sound with no pain in it at all. The pack watched all of it. The Xenology chief came out to the line on the first afternoon, the old Vorn with her carapace on the dull matte gray of great age, and she stood at the edge of the mud for a while watching the human work, and Ren let her stand there, because she had read the reports the old scientist filed and knew whose side she had been on in the high room. After a time, the chief spoke. I was in the room when you filed the first warning, she said. Grid 9, Denning Apex. Do not clear, I read it. I want you to know that I read it, consultant, and that I told the survey board it should be credited, and that I was overruled, and that I did not go back and fight it a second time, because I had been overruled 40 years running and I had learned to stop. Her mandibles worked slowly. That is my failure, not the War Master's. Mine. He did not read your reports. I read them and I understood them and I let them be ignored because I had decided a long time ago that being right did not matter enough to fight for. You should know that I know it. Ren sat back on her heels, her hands red to the wrist, and looked at the old alien for a while. How long have you been cataloging worlds like this one? She said. 41 years. And how many of them are gone now, reduced, stripped? Ren said it without accusation, flatly, the way she said everything. You spent 41 years learning the most beautiful things anyone's ever seen, and then writing them down so somebody else could decide whether to erase them. That's a hard way to spend a life. I'm not surprised you stopped fighting. She turned back to the wound, to the slow work of it. But you're standing at this line and the War Master's alone in his redoubt, so maybe you didn't stop as much as you think. She glanced up once. Come back tomorrow. Bring your instruments. If she lives, you're going to learn things about these animals nobody's ever known, and I'd rather it was you than someone who thinks they're livestock. That's not nothing. That's the opposite of nothing. Go on. The zoology chief came back the next day, and the day after that, and she was there for the fever and the recovery and everything that came after, and 41 years into a life spent watching worlds die, she began, at last, to spend it watching one of them live. They did not leave. Through the whole first day and into the night they held their long crescent on the cleared ground, 30 slate mountains lying in the mud with the mist rising off their backs, and they watched the fortress and the human, and the wounded one with an attention that never wavered and never relaxed. The soldiers on the wall watched them back. Nobody fired. Nobody so much as raised a weapon. The word had gone down the whole line, from Asu and from something deeper than Asu, and there was not a soldier in the anvil who needed to be told twice what would happen if one wrong shot went out across that ground. Twice in the night one of the pack rose and came forward, slow and vast, to within a few meters of the wounded mother, and stood over her and scented her, and made the low, complex sound to the others, and went back to the crescent, checking on her, reporting to the rest. Asu watched it both times from the tower and did not sleep either time afterward. Ren slept in snatches, against the beast's warm side, the cub tucked between them, her hand resting on the plates over the wound so that she would feel any change in the breathing before she heard it. On the second morning, Asu came out across the yard with 2 rations and sat down beside her at the line she now let him cross, and they ate together in the gray light with the pack watching and the mother breathing her slow tidal breaths beside them. And it was, Asu thought, the strangest and most peaceful meal of his life. They'll want you to explain this, he said. The fleet, when the relief flight comes down, they'll want to know how a stakehold that reported itself lost is standing, with the apex population arranged around it like an honor guard and a human giving orders to the line. He turned a ration bar over in his hand. I don't know how you explain it, Ren. I was here and I can't explain it. You don't explain it, Ren said. You just tell them what happened in order and you let it be strange. People spend so much effort trying to make the true things sound reasonable. It never works. The true things are strange. That's how you know them. She looked out at the pack. When's the relief flight? Asu's signals officer told them, an hour later, and the answer changed everything. The flight that was coming down was not a relief flight. Asu read the fleet order twice on the signal slate, standing in the wreck of the yard with the wind coming cold off the tree line, and then he read it a third time, because he did not want to believe what it said, and reading it again did not help. The War Master's last transmission before Asu took command, sent in the worst hour of the night, before the reunion, before any of it, had gone up to the fleet exactly as Saj had spoken it into the redoubt. This position is lost. Uncatalogued apex megafauna, lethal, uncontainable, recommend sanitation. And the fleet, receiving that from a War Master of Saj record, a War Master who did not exaggerate and did not panic and did not use a word like uncontainable unless he meant it, had done what the doctrine of the Reduction Corps required them to do with a lost stakehold and a lethal uncatalogued apex. They had tasked a strike cruiser to sanitize the site from orbit. It was coming. It was 10 hours out and closing, and when it arrived it would put a pattern of kinetic ordnance across the anvil and the cleared ground and the tree line for 2 kilometers in every direction. A standard sanitation pattern, enough to turn the whole valley to glass and slag, and end forever the question of the uncontainable apex. In the pack, in the mother, in the cub, in the whole social apex population of the range that Asu now knew had come running through the dark to help one of its own. An end, if she would not leave, the human who had walked out empty-handed to stop a war. "Recall it," Ren said when he told her. Her voice was very flat. "Signal the fleet. Tell them the position isn't lost. Tell them it's resolved." "I've sent it," Asu said. "I sent it the moment I read the order. I sent it under my own authority as acting commander of the Anvil, and I sent it 3 times, and the strike cruiser has acknowledged receipt and is holding course." He made himself say the rest of it. "Ren, the order to sanitize came from a War Master." A recall from an acting line warden 3 hours later, reporting that the same uncontainable apex is now, what tame, allied, arranged in a friendly crescent around the stakehold and being nursed by a human contractor. That recall does not read as good news to the fleet. It reads as a compromised position. It reads as a commander who has lost his fortress and possibly his mind and is transmitting under duress. The stronger I make the recall, the worse it looks. They will not call off a sanitation on the word of a junior officer, describing something that cannot happen. Ren was quiet for a moment. "Then it can't be your word," she said. "It has to be his." They found War Master Saj in the command redoubt, alone. He had not left it since he walked back across the yard. He had not eaten and he had not slept. He sat at the dead tactical table in the gray light with his carapace gone dull and his hands flat on the stone. And when Asu and the human came through the blast door, he did not look up. And for a moment Asu thought the man had simply stopped, the way a machine stops, the way a thing stops when the thing that ran it is gone. "War Master," Asu said, "the fleet is sanitizing the site, on your transmission, a strike cruiser 10 hours out. It will glass the valley." Saj did not move. "Good," he said after a while. "Then it ends clean. The apex is destroyed, the site is closed, the record shows a stakehold lost to uncatalogued megafauna and properly sanitized. A defeat, but a clean one. Written correctly, it is almost, his mandibles worked, it is almost survivable, for the core, for the record." He looked up at last, and his eyes found the human, and there was nothing in them Asu could read. "You should leave, consultant. You have perhaps 9 hours to reach a distance the pattern won't touch. Take the flyer. Take the cub if you want it. Nothing else that is on this ground in 9 hours is going to be alive." "Recall it," Ren said. "I cannot recall a sanitation, and I would not if I could." "You can." Ren stepped up to the dead table, and she put her own 2 hands flat on the stone across from his, mud-stained and blood-stained, small beside his, and she leaned into them, and she looked at him the way Asu thought. She must have looked at the frightened cub in the pen in the dark, not gently exactly, but completely, with the whole of her attention, seeing all of him. "You can send 1 transmission that stops it. You. Not Asu, not me, you, the War Master whose word they'll believe because you're the one who sent the order that started it. 1 transmission. You tell them the truth. You tell them the apex is not uncontainable. You tell them the position is not lost. You tell them you were wrong." "I was wrong," Saj said, and the words came out of him like stones. "Yes, I know that I was wrong, consultant. I have known it since I stood in that yard and owed my life to you and watched my army refuse me. You do not have to come into my redoubt to tell me I was wrong." "I'm not telling you," Ren said. "I'm asking you to tell them." And there it was, and Asu saw the War Master understand it, saw the shape of the thing close around Saj like a trap. To save the pack, to save the mother and the cub and the whole range and the human, the War Master would have to send a transmission to the fleet that undid the clean defeat, that replaced lost to uncatalogued megafauna, properly sanitized with the truth. That he had cleared a den against the express written warning of the consultant, that he had taken the cubs, that his handling had killed 3 of them, that his barrier had driven the mother to destroy his walls, that his last 4 maulers and his reserve had died for nothing, that his own army had refused his order to fire, that he had drawn his weapon to murder the wounded animal out of spite and been stopped by an unarmed human, and that the whole of it had ended not in a Vorn victory or even a clean Vorn defeat, but in the one thing the Corps could not put in a manual, a human contractor walking out empty-handed and resolving what an army could not. He would have to send that, over his own name, into the permanent record, to save a pack of animals and one human. It was the end of him. Whatever the sanitation left of his career, the truth would finish. The empty-handed charge, written into the record, meant the War Master's charge written beside it forever, the commander who caused all of it and could not fix any of it, and had to be saved by the least of his people. "They will break me," Saj said quietly. "Yes," Ren said. She did not soften it. Asu noticed that she never once softened anything for the War Master, never gave him the small mercy of a comfortable lie, and understood that this was itself a kind of respect, the only kind Saj had left that was worth having. "They'll break you, and 30 families of a thing your people never bothered to understand will go on living on this range, and a cub will grow up with its mother instead of dying in a cage, because at the very end you did one true thing." She straightened up off the table. "That's the trade, War Master, your record for their lives. I can't make you take it. I've never been able to make you people do anything. But the cruiser's 9 hours out, and you're the only one whose word can turn it, and I think—" She paused, and something almost gentle came into her flat, tired voice for the first time. "I think you're a better man than the night you had. I think most people are. Prove me right. Send it." War Master Saj looked at the human for a long moment. Then he reached across the dead table and pulled the signal slate toward him and began to record. The transmission went up, and the fleet did not answer. That was the worst part. In the hours that followed, the silence. Saj had recorded it all in the flat, unsparing language of a Vorn after-action report, sparing himself nothing, and Asu had appended his own confirmation and the Xenology chief hers, and they had sent the whole of it up to the strike cruiser and the fleet behind it, and then there had been nothing. The cruiser acknowledged receipt. The cruiser held course. The cruiser did not turn, and did not fire, and did not speak, and the hours bled down toward the arrival window, while the 3 of them sat in the redoubt watching the plot, and understood that somewhere up in the dark, a ship's commander was reading a report that could not be true, from a War Master confessing to a catastrophe, recommending the reversal of a sanitation order on the grounds that the uncontainable apex was now being nursed back to health by the human who had befriended it, and was deciding, with the clock running, whether to believe a word of it. "They think it's duress," Asu said. "They think we're compromised. They think the human has us at the wrong end of something." "Then let them look," Ren said and stood up. "You've got optical feed from the walls, don't you? The wide survey cameras, the ones that map the game trails." She was already moving toward the door. "Point every one of them at the yard, all of them. Full resolution, no compression, straight up the relay to that cruiser. Don't narrate it, don't explain it, just show them." They pointed the cameras at the yard. And up in the dark, the commander of the strike cruiser, a Vorn named Arduves, whom none of them would ever meet, who had a sanitation order from a War Master of unimpeachable record, and a recall from the same War Master confessing to the ruin of his own command, and 80 minutes to decide which to believe. Commander Vess looked at what the wide survey cameras of the anvil sent up the relay, and saw, in full resolution and no compression, the thing that could not be true, a ruined stakehold. 30 apex megafauna arranged in a patient crescent on the cleared ground, not attacking, not moving, watching. A wounded one the size of a siegewalker lying in the mud under a rigged tarp with a field heater against its flank. A cub asleep against its side. And a small brown human, filthy with mud and dried blood, kneeling at the great animal's chest with her bare arms working in the wound, while a line warden held a light for her, and the whole surviving garrison of the fortress stood along the broken walls with their weapons slung, watching a human doctor an apex predator that could kill her with a breath. Nobody has ever recorded what Commander Vess said when she saw it. Asu asked once, years later, through the channels such questions travel, and the answer that came back was second-hand and probably embroidered, but he chose to believe it anyway, because it was the kind of thing that ought to have been said. They say Commander Vess watched the feed in silence for a full minute, and then keyed her weapons officer and said, "Stand down the pattern." And when the weapons officer, who had a lawful sanitation order from a war master, asked her to confirm, asked her, in effect, "Are you certain on your record, on your career?" They say Commander Vess said only, "I'm not going to be the one who dropped ordnance on that. Find someone in the fleet who wants to. It will not be me." The strike cruiser turned. It turned 40 minutes before the arrival window, high up and unseen, and the plot in the redoubt showed the great red vector of it bend away from the valley and climb back toward the black. And Asu made a sound he was not proud of and gripped the edge of the dead table with both hands. And War Master Saj closed his eyes, and Ren was not there to see any of it, because Ren was out in the yard, and the mother was dying. It happened on the second night, the way the bad turns always happen, in the small cold hours when the body's guard is down. Ren had known the risk from the first. A wound that deep, in a body that large, closed in a mud yard with a field clamp and bare hands and no true surgery. The danger was never only the drowning. The danger was after, the fever, the wound going bad from the inside, the infection blooming in the great warm dark of the animal where no cleaning could reach. She had watched for it and dreaded it, and on the second night it came. The mother's breathing went shallow and fast. Her flank grew hot under Ren's palm, hotter than the field heater, hot as a living coal. The clear amber of her eye went dull and distant. She stopped tracking the cub. She stopped tracking Ren. She lay in the mud and burned, and the small, careful work of the clamp and the packing meant nothing against it. And Ren knelt there in the dark with her hand on the burning flank and understood that she had come all this way, done all this impossible thing, and might still lose her. And the pack knew. They knew before Ren did, in the way they knew everything, in the low register below hearing. Out on the cleared ground the crescent stirred. The patient watching stillness that had held for 2 days broke, and the great slate shapes rose in the dark, one after another, and the low sound that went down the rank of them now was not the checking sound or the acknowledging sound. It was lower and harder and older, and Asu, jolted awake on the tower by the change in it, felt the cold go all the way through him, because he did not need the human to translate it. He had heard the beginning of it once before, in the first hour of the night the war began. It was the sound the mother had made, standing in a broken house, before the fury came. It was grief starting to gather. And it was gathering, this time, in 30 chests at once, out on the ground, 40 meters from a fortress full of the creatures that had caused all of it. And if the mother died now, in the mud, with her kin gathered around and the fortress that had killed her young standing whole in front of them, there was not one thing in the universe that was going to stop what came next. "Ren," Asu said into the channel, low, urgent. "Ren, the pack, they're up in there. I know that sound, Ren. That's the sound from the first hour. That's the if she dies." "I know," Ren said. Her voice was very quiet and very steady, and Asu could hear underneath it that she was holding it steady by main force. "I know what it is. Get your people off the walls, Asu, right now. Quiet and slow, no running, but get them back from the perimeter and get them low. If I lose her, I can't hold 30 of them. I could barely hold them the once. If she goes, you run and you don't stop and you don't look back and you let me." She stopped. "Just get them back. Give me the night. Let me work." Asu got his people back from the walls. And Ren worked. She would never be able to say, afterward, exactly what she did that night, because most of it was not doing at all. She opened the wound again and cleaned what she could reach and packed it with the last of the antiseptic, and that was the doing, and it took an hour, and it was not the part that mattered. The part that mattered was the rest of the night, the long dark hours after there was nothing left to do, when Ren lay down against the burning flank of the dying animal with the frightened cub pressed between them, and she put her hand flat over the great laboring heart, and she talked. She talked the way she had talked to the cub in the pen, the low, unbroken stream of it. "Easy, easy, stay with me, stay with him. You came all this way. You came through a wall. You're not going to lose him now to a little heat. Stay, stay. I've got you. I've got you both." And out on the ground the pack stood in the dark with the grief gathering in their chests, and they listened to the small human voice going on and on against the flank of their dying kinswoman, and they did not charge. Because the wounded one had claimed the human, and as long as the human was in there fighting for her, the claim held, and the grief could not become the fury while the claim held. It was the longest night of Asu's life, and he only watched it. The fever broke a little before dawn. Ren felt it go the way she had felt everything all night, through the flat of her hand on the great flank, felt the coal heat crest, and hang and then, slowly, slowly begin to ebb. The mother's breathing deepened. The fast shallow panting eased into the long tidal pull Ren had come to know, and then, faint at first and growing, the great body began to sweat the heat out, and the dull amber eye which had been staring at nothing for hours cleared and found the cub, and then found the human, and the mother lifted her head off the mud weakly, barely, but she lifted it, and she touched Ren once on the shoulder, the scenting touch, the "this is mine" touch, and let her head fall back and slept. A true sleep this time. A healing sleep. Out on the cleared ground in the gray of the dawn, the grief that had been gathering in 30 chests all night went still, and then, one by one, the great slate shapes lowered themselves back down into the mud of the crescent, and the low hard sound faded, and in its place, soft and rolling and vast, the pack began to make a sound Asu had never heard from them before and would never forget. A deep contented resonant burr, 30 of them together, the exact sound the cub made against its mother's side, the home sound, the safe sound, rolling out across the ruined valley in the first light. The sound of a pack that has watched one of its own come back from the edge and knows who to thank. Ren lay against the sleeping animal's flank in the middle of that sound, filthy and hollowed out and shaking with exhaustion. The cub burred warm against her chest, and she closed her eyes, and for the first time in 3 days she let herself rest. The mother stood on the 4th day. Ren had not pushed her to it. You did not push 8 tons of recovering apex to do anything. But on the 4th day, in the middle of the afternoon, the great animal simply decided she had lain in the mud long enough, and she gathered her legs under her and she got up. It was not graceful. The wounded foreleg trembled and nearly failed her, and Ren stood well back with her heart in her throat and did not go to help, because there was no helping, and because the animal needed to know it could do this on its own. The mother swayed. She caught herself. And then she was up, standing tall for the first time in 4 days, a mountain of scarred slate risen out of the ruined yard, and she shook herself the way a beast shakes off water, mud flying, plates rattling, and out on the cleared ground the whole pack came to its feet at once and sang, and along the walls of the anvil 400 soldiers of the Vorn Reduction Corps watched an apex predator they had tried to kill stand up whole, and some of them, Asu saw it, and never told anyone. And never forgot it, some of them wept. The cub went to her at once, burring, winding between her forelegs, and the mother lowered her great head and scented it over and over, crown to tail, the way she had that first night, as if she still could not quite believe it. Then she lifted her head, and she looked across the yard, and she found the small brown human standing back by the medkit with her arms folded, and her plain tired face doing the thing it did that the Vorn could never read, and the mother of the Vantok crossed the yard to the human on legs that still trembled, and she lowered her enormous head until the amber eye was level with Ren's face, an arm's length away, and she breathed her in one long time. "Hey," Ren said softly, "look at you up on your feet. I told you it was just time." She reached up slowly the way she did everything, and she laid her small hand flat on the great scarred jaw, and the animal let her and leaned into it a fraction, the whole vast weight of its head resting a little into the human's hand. "There," Ren said. "There, now go on and take your boy home. That's the last thing I want from you. Go home." The mother stayed a moment longer. Then she drew back and turned, and walked slowly across the yard toward the broken east wall and the cleared ground and the tree line beyond, the cub trotting at her heel, and the pack rose out of its crescent to meet her. And that was the thing Asu would carry to the end of his days, the thing he tried and failed to make the review board understand, the thing that no doctrine of any people had a word for. The pack did not simply leave. They formed up. 30 apex predators, the deadliest single population the Corps had catalogued on any world in a decade of reductions, arranged themselves around the wounded mother and her cub in a slow, deliberate order. The strong on the outside, the young toward the center, the whole mass of them moving as one great body, and they turned to go. And as they turned, the mother stopped and looked back across the yard at the human one last time and made a sound. It was not a song. It was short and low, and Ren had heard it only once before on the second night in the worst hour, when the mother's fever crested, and the animal had looked at her through the dull haze of it, and made that same small sound before she slipped under. Asu had asked her later what it meant, and Ren had been quiet for a while, and then she had said, "I think it's the sound she makes for the cub, when he's frightened or hurt or lost. I think it's the sound that means you're mine and I've got you." And Asu had said, "But she made it at you," and Ren had said yes, and had not been able to say anything else for a while. The mother made the sound at the human. And then she turned, and led her pack and her son out through the broken wall of the fortress, and across the cleared ground toward the green, 30 slate mountains moving as one in the gold light of the late afternoon. And the ground shook with the going of them, and the soldiers on the walls did not make a sound. And Ren Osai stood in the middle of the ruined yard with her arms folded and watched them go, and did not wipe her face, because there was no one watching who mattered. The fleet relieved War Master Saj of command by the end of the week. It was done quietly in the way of such things, a change of orders, a transfer, a review to be convened at a later date on a station far from anywhere. Nobody said the word broken, because the Vorn did not say such words out loud, but everyone understood, and Saj understood most of all. His after-action transmission, the one Ren had asked him to send, the one that had turned the strike cruiser, was now the permanent record of the anvil, and it would follow him for whatever was left of his service. The War Master who cleared the den, who took the cubs, who raised the fence, who lost 4 maulers and 2 walls and his reserve, whose own army refused his order to fire, and who was saved at the last by the contract fauna consultant he had hired for the price of her food. He came to find Ren before he left. She was at the beast pens, the empty pens now, Ash's pen still standing open, the field heater cold, packing her few things into a single case because her contract was ended, and there was nothing left on this world for a fauna consultant but the ruin of a job that should never have been. Saj stood in the doorway of the handling shed, filling it, his dull carapace catching the light, and for a while he did not speak, and Ren let him not speak and went on packing. "I have been trying to decide," Saj said at last, "what to say to you." "You don't have to say anything, War Master." I am aware that I do." His mandibles worked. "In my whole life I have never lost. Do you understand what I am telling you, consultant? 29 reductions, not one loss. I have put down armies. I have broken fortresses that were called unbreakable, and I came to a green world full of what I called livestock, and I ignored a warning I could have read in an afternoon, and I lost everything to one animal that a human contractor ended in a single night by walking out with an empty hand." He was quiet. "I ordered my army to run. You did the opposite of everything I know how to do, and it worked, and I will spend the rest of my life understanding why." "You want me to tell you why," Ren said. She closed the case. She turned and looked at him, the old broken commander in the doorway, and there was no cruelty in her and no triumph either, only the flat, honest attention that was the truest thing about her. "It's not complicated, War Master. It only looks complicated because your whole life is built to make it invisible. She wasn't your enemy. She was never your enemy. She was a mother looking for her children, and you had the answer to everything she wanted the whole time, in a pen, being kept warm by the one person you wouldn't listen to. You didn't lose to a monster. You lost because you decided something was a monster so you wouldn't have to understand it, and then you fought the thing you decided on instead of the thing that was actually there. She picked up the case. That's the whole of it. That's the only lesson. The thing in front of you is almost never the thing you've decided it is. My people learned it the hard way, a long time ago, on our own world with our own beasts. It's about the only thing we're good at. Paying attention to what's actually there. Saj was silent for a long moment. The record will say I was saved by a human, he said. It will follow me. Yes, Ren said, it will. She stopped in the doorway beside him, small beside his bulk, and she looked up at him, and she said the last thing she ever said to him, and Asu, who was waiting outside, heard it and wrote it down. But it'll also say you sent the transmission. When it counted, when it cost you everything, you told the truth to save 30 families you'd never bothered to understand. Most commanders wouldn't have. You did. So the record follows you fine. Let it. It's not the worst thing to be followed by. And she walked out past him into the light, and War Master Saj stood alone in the empty handling shed for a while, and then he too went out and left the anvil, and this part of the story is not about him anymore. The reduction of the green world was never completed. Asu saw to that. He was confirmed in command of what was left of the anvil within the month, a battlefield promotion of the strangest kind. The line warden who had held his fire and given command to a human, elevated because the fleet, reading the record, could find no one else who had come out of that night with clean hands and a clear head. The first order he gave as commander was to halt the demolition. The second was to file, over his own name, a recommendation that the range be reclassified from a reduction site to a protected xenological reserve, on the grounds that it hosted a social apex population of unprecedented intelligence, whose destruction would be both a scientific catastrophe and, in the flat, careful language he chose, a moral one. The Corps did not use words like moral. Asu used it anyway and made them read it, and to the surprise of everyone including himself, they listened. Because the record of the anvil had gone up the whole fleet by then, and there was not a commander in it who wanted to be the one who finished what War Master Saj had started. The valley the Vorn had come to strip to the bedrock became, instead, a station. A small one at first, the Xenology chief and a skeleton crew, quartered in the repaired south wing of the anvil, with a standing order that no emitter was ever again to be raised anywhere on the range, and that the study of the Vantok was to proceed by observation only, at a distance, on the animal's terms. The old scientist took to the work with the fierce joy of someone who has waited 40 years to be right in a way that mattered. She sent Ren her findings, sometimes in the years after, long careful reports about the pack structure and the denning cycles and the deep register language they were only beginning to map, and every one of them opened with the same line, which the old Vorn had adopted as a kind of private creed, and which she had gotten, she always noted, from a human. The thing in front of you is almost never the thing you have decided it is. And humans, along that stretch of the frontier, stopped being a negligible cost. It was a small thing at first, and then it was not. Word went where words go, in the soft, strange economy of species that trade rumors about one another, and the word was no longer only the old one about humans and animals. The new word had a shape to it now, a story, a night at a stakehold called the Anvil where an army broke against one beast and a human ended it by walking out with an empty hand. And other expeditions, other corps, other worlds began to ask, when they went into places where the local things ran large and lethal, whether there was a human they might hire, not for a negligible cost. The contracts changed. The manuals, slowly over years, began to acquire a strange new entry, filed first at the anvil and copied outward, an entry with no precedent in any martial doctrine of any people, defining a maneuver of the highest order of courage that the Corps could conceive of and ranking it, in the flat language of record, above the taking of any wall, the empty-handed charge. Ren thought all of it was faintly ridiculous. She said so to Asu on the day she finally left. She stayed longer than her contract in the end. There was no contract left to stay under. The reduction that had hired her was dissolved, and the reserve that replaced it had no line in its budget for a fauna consultant. She stayed anyway quietly for the better part of a season, because the mother was still recovering and Wren wanted to see her whole, and because, though she would not have said it in these words, she was not quite ready to leave the pack. They came to the tree line sometimes in that season, not into the cleared ground. The cleared ground was a thing of the bad time, and they did not enter it. But they came to the edge of the green in the evenings, and the mother would be among them, the wound on her chest gone to a knot of silver scar among all the other silver rivers, and the cub, not so small a cub now. The thing grew like a landslide, and by the end of the season stood higher at the shoulder than Wren was tall, all its soft ash-gray plates gone hard and dark. The cub would come out ahead of the pack to the very edge of the trees and make the click, the come here click, the one it had made in the pen in the dark, and Wren would walk out across the last of the cleared ground alone to meet it, and no one at the station ever quite got used to the sight. They tried to stop her once early. A new officer, transferred in, who had not been there for the bad night and knew the Vantok only from the record as the thing that had killed the crews of 4 maulers. He saw the human walking out alone toward a mass of apex predators at the tree line, and did what any sane officer would do, and ordered a squad out to bring her back, at weapons ready. The pack came off the tree line before the squad had crossed 20 meters. It was not a charge. Asu, who came running at the alarm, would be very precise about that afterward because it mattered. It was not a charge. Nothing was hurt, no weapon was fired, no one so much as stumbled. It was simply that 30 apex predators rose as one out of the shadow of the trees, and came forward onto the cleared ground in a slow, deliberate wall, the mother at the center of it, and arranged themselves between the human and the armed squad and stood, and looked at the soldiers with a patience that was somehow far more terrible than any snarl. And the new officer, who was not a stupid man, understood in about 1 second exactly what he was looking at, and understood that the only reason his squad was still alive was that the human had not told the pack otherwise, and ordered his people to lower their weapons and stand very still. And Wren, out in the middle of it, turned around and looked at the frightened squad and looked at the wall of slate that had put itself between them and her, and she raised one hand not to the soldiers, to the pack, and she said, in the flat, low voice that carried, "Easy. They're mine. They're friends. Easy now." And the pack, at the sound of it, eased. The plates came down. The wall unmade itself slowly, and the great shapes drifted back toward the tree line, and the mother was the last to go, and before she went she turned her head and looked for a long moment at the squad of soldiers who had come out with their weapons ready toward the human she had claimed, and she did not need to make a sound. The look was the whole sentence. Then she turned and followed her pack into the green. The new officer did not order anyone out to bring Wren back ever again. Nobody did. It went into the standing orders of the station, in Asu's own hand. The consultant walks to the tree line alone, at her own discretion, and no one interferes, and no one goes armed within sight of it. Because the thing that had happened at the anvil was not a thing that had ended on the night it happened. It was a thing that was still true every evening at the edge of the green. That there was a human on that world who could walk unarmed into a wall of the deadliest predators the Corps had ever catalogued, and be safe there, safer than anywhere else on the whole range, because the pack that would tear an army apart to protect one of its own had decided, on a night of grief and mud and mercy, that she was one of its own. Loyalty, the old word for it. The Vorn had 100 words for the ways the line held together, and not one of them fit this. And in the end the old xenology chief borrowed the human word for her reports, because it was the only one that did. Loyalty, the thing that came running the other way when the army was ordered to run. Wren left on a gray morning at the turn of the season, and she went to the tree line first. She went alone before dawn, the way she liked to do things, with her single case waiting by the flyer and no one to see her off but Asu, who walked her out to the edge of the cleared ground and then stopped, because past that edge was hers and not his, and they both knew it. The green was wet and black and still in the last of the dark, and the mist was coming up off the ground, and for a moment there was nothing there at all, and Wren stood at the edge of the trees with her hands in her pockets and waited, and did not call because you did not call them. You waited, and you paid attention, and they came or they did not. They came. The mother first, out of the mist, huge and silent and whole, the silver knot of the old wound catching the first gray light, and behind her the pack drifting out of the dark in their slow, deliberate order. And ahead of her, bounding, graceless, enormous now and still somehow the same, the cub Ash, though Wren had never told the Vorn the name and never would, because it was hers and the animals and no one else's. Ash came out ahead of them all and crossed the last of the ground to her and lowered its great head, higher than her own now, and pressed its blunt dark jaw against her chest the way it had when it was the size of a hound and dying in the corner of a pen, and made the deep contented burr, the home sound. And Wren put both her arms as far around its neck as they would go and stood like that for a while in the gray and the mist, and said nothing at all, because there was nothing that needed saying and both of them knew it. Then she stepped back, and she put her hand flat on the cub's jaw one last time, and she looked past it at the mother standing whole in the mist with her pack around her, and she said, quietly, the last thing. "I've got to go now, you know that. This isn't my world, I was only ever passing through it, and you were always the ones who belonged here, not us, never us." She smiled, a little, the plain, tired smile that the Vorn could never read and the animals never needed to. "Look after him, look after all of them. You did the hardest thing there is, you came for him when everything told you to run, and you didn't stop, and you got him back. I'll remember that as long as I live. I'll tell people about it, about you." She took her hand off the cub's jaw. "Go on, go home. Both of us have to go home now." And she turned, and she walked back across the cleared ground toward the flyer and Asu and the rest of her life. And she did not look back, because looking back was for people who were not sure, and she was sure. She was halfway across when the call came. It rolled out of the tree line behind her, low and vast and deep, up through the soles of her feet and into the bones of her, the searching song and the grief song and the fury song all gone out of it now, and only the last thing left, the home sound, the "you are mine" sound, the sound the mother had made against the human's shoulder in the worst hour of the fever, the whole pack taking it up together, 30 deep chests loosing it across the ruined ground in the gray dawn. Not a threat, not a warning. Not a thing an army could ever have understood in 100 years of manuals. An acknowledgement, a thank you in the only language they had, a farewell. Wren stopped, in the middle of the cleared ground, with the sound going through her. She did not turn around, but she lifted one hand and held it up, open and empty, the way she had held it up on the night the guns were down and the pack was 3 strides from the wall, the empty hand, the whole of what she had ever brought to any of it, and she held it there a moment against the gray light so they could see it. And then she lowered it, and she walked the rest of the way to the flyer, and she got in, and she went home. Behind her, at the edge of the green, the pack that had broken an army stood in the mist and watched the small brown human go, and the mother of the Vantok held her son against her scarred side, and did not move until the flyer was gone into the dawn, and then she turned, and led her family back into the trees, and the world the Vorn had come to break went on being what it had always been underneath everything they had decided about it, alive, and hers, and home.